County Commission to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Bruce, would you like to lead?
Everyone take their hat off, put their hand over their heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Bruce. You all have copies of the agenda. Do we have any issues, changes to the agenda?
I didn't see the agenda.
No. With that, is there approval of the agenda?
Copies were at the back table. Okay. David approves it. Second, Kirsten. Vote in approval. The agenda is approved. Announcements. There has been an issue with the purpose of this commission. People are being told this commission exists to deny you the right to vote. That is not the case.
That's not what was said.
That has been said. I've seen it in an email that was blasted out.
You're using a very narrow definition of what has been said.
This commission was created in accordance with the Idaho State Constitution and the Idaho State Statutes, Title 31, Chapters 50 through 58. We're instructed by the state to review the current county government structure, compare it with the 7 forms defined in the statutes, and make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. The board can then place that recommendation on the ballot for the citizens of Kootenai County to determine the form of government they want. This commission cannot take away your right to vote. It is possible the recommendation this commission makes could increase the number of elected officials. You have the right to free speech, but not the right to trample the rights of others. If you cannot control yourself, please take your free speech outside. From the time this commission meetings are called to order until the time the meeting is adjourned, please refrain from disrupting the commission's business with emotional displays or outbursts. You're welcome to observe this commission's meetings under the Idaho open meeting laws, but public comments are restricted to public hearings. You're welcome to email your questions and comments at any time to the Board of County Commissioners. They will be forwarded to this commission. As far as the commissioners, please remember to treat all of our visitors with respect. This commission is a scope limited to the forms of county government. Current news is not part of that scope. So please restrict your questions tonight to these commissioners, to the purpose of this commission, to review the forms of county government. With that, has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes? We have minutes for both June 30th and July 7th. Taking them in order, the June 30th minutes. Any issues? Yes, ma'am.
I have a comment on the June 30th ones, the ones that were amended. I recommend the top say amended, and they don't, so it's hard to tell which are which.
There has not been an official one yet, so we wouldn't
Right.
have an amendment to it.
Okay,
So far, we've had only draft amendments
okay, but even on the draft, it would have been nice to set.
to know which one's which.
Right, exactly.
Other comments on the June 30th minutes? Do we have a motion to approve the June 30th minutes?
I move that we approve the June 30th.
Bob Fish moves it. Second?
Second.
Second. Do we have a vote to approve the minutes? Looks like they're approved. Moving on to the July 7th minutes. Comments? No comments. Are we ready to approve those minutes?
I move we approve the July 7th, 2021 minutes.
Thank you, Bob. Second?
Second.
Okay. We have
Cleary.
Brian Cleary. Call for vote. Approve? Minutes are approved. As far as I know, we have no reports outstanding or old business. We can move straight to the interview with the county commissioners, Bill Brooks and Chris Filios. Commissioner Brooks, Commissioner Filios, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Would either one of you care to start with your statements?
I guess I'll lead off.
Certainly.
Should turn that-
Okay, so I want to thank the Study Commission. I know you're volunteering a good deal of your time, and we as county commissioners, and I do think I speak for all three, are certainly appreciative of that. Thank you, folks, for attending. I know this is a very charged topic, but I hope we'll be able to make it clearer for most people tonight. I certainly plan to address this by way of both opinion and facts. And what I'd like to do is cover a series of areas. I'm going to try to keep my presentation to less than 30 minutes. And what I'm going to do is try to address 5 key areas that I think are basically endemic to this discussion. And those areas are qualification, accountability, continuity, representation, and control. And they're not necessarily distinct, and so as I go through my notes, you'll find that some of these are intertwined. Let me start with a little bit of a bio. I was born and raised in New York City, the first 27 years of my life. That's where I was educated. I am the product of immigrant parents. Both came from Greece. Actually, I'm second generation, but my mom and dad divorced when I was a year old. She remarried, so my stepdad was also from the Grecian islands. My mom had a 6th grade education, my stepdad an 8th grade education. And in any case, I did grow up there, started working at the young age of 15, anyway, went to school, earned both bachelor's and master's degrees in New York City, completed a 5-year National Guard commitment in artillery, and also fathered 2 children. And we left New York City in 1975, and since then we've lived a couple of years in Iowa, 20 years in New Hampshire, where we raised our 2 children, and total of now about 24 years in Idaho. And so that's a little bit about my background. First half of my life was in high tech. I did spend my life working for companies, or invested, if you will, such as AT&T, Rockwell Collins, Digital Equipment Corp., which was one of the revolutionaries in the mini-computer industry. Also worked for a small startup for a while back in Massachusetts, and I don't mind saying that I think I come from a perspective of being able to compare both government and private industry. I will say that in my capacity in private industry, I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly. I've seen a couple of people go to jail for misrepresentation or defrauding of investors, and so I've had a fairly broad background and a fair amount of exposure. And so what I want to do first is go into the area of qualifications. When we're talking about running the county, and this is something that I hasten to point out to a lot of folks, and I do this frequently when I give presentations. People will often say to us, well, you're supposed to represent us. Now, let me clarify that. The people who represent you or represent us are the people that you send to Boise, your senators, your legislators. We represent the public in a very general sense, in a very minimal sense, in the sense that we are hired to run the county. And that's right now a little over $100 million budget. We run day-to-day operations. It's not even fair to call us a 3-headed CEO. We're more of a 3-headed COO, that is to say, chief operating officers. And this is what we do as a body of 3 people. Often that does become an issue because every meeting has to be an open meeting, and every decision we make is a vote of 2 out of 3. I cannot command any of the individuals who work for me to go do something. Chances are they would, but they could also tell me to go pound sand. I need a second vote, and that's the way it's set up. I should point out also that when we talk about qualifications, and this is something that's very key, I believe that we invest in people who invest in themselves. The board that is currently serving, Leslie, Bill, and myself, is the first board where all 3 hold 4-year degrees. That has never happened before in the county. We've had other boards where 1 or 2 have had 4-year degrees. And again, I'm a firm believer, if you're going to invest in someone, invest in the person who invests in himself or herself. And that's where you learn your critical thinking skills. That's where you learn your analytical abilities. also enhanced by your work experience and the time I spent in high tech. I worked for people who had PhDs, typically in engineering and other sciences, from top schools, people who challenged me to think, who asked me to consider alternatives that would be rejected if I was making a proposal for an investment. And so I learned to think critically, to defend my position, and I expect other people who I work with and who work for us to be able to do the same thing. So that's a little background. Next month, I do celebrate my 50th wedding anniversary. We do have 2 children. One is an archaeologist in Australia. The other one is a Hollywood film, I shouldn't say producer. He does marketing trailers for films. And we have 2 grandchildren. So let me move on from there. So that's a little bit about qualifications. I can say more about that, but bear in mind that we are running an operation. We're not simply passing laws. We do that too. We pass ordinances. For example, we just passed the waterways ordinance. We do operate in what's called a quasi-judicial capacity, where we hear, for example, land use appeals that come before us, and those land use appeals or decisions can deal with things like zone changes and other land use decisions of that type. And we also operate in an administrative capacity, where we do budgets, organization, and things of that nature. So if you look at the federal government, where you have executive, legislative, and judicial, we do all 3 rolled into a body of 3 people. Unlike the people you send to Boise, their job is to simply legislate. Now, when they do that, they basically determine what we, as a board, as county commissioners, can and cannot do. So we are basically governed by statute. So every decision we make, or at least speaking for myself, I think I can speak for the others, one eye is toward statute, the other the facts of the case, and that's how we rule, theoretically, okay? So let me go to the question of accountability. And this is a very key element. People talk about accountability, that if you're electing your officials, you have accountability. I'm here to tell you, you don't. Not only do you not have accountability, I'm not so sure that we do. Let me read you statute. Title 31, which describes county and county law, okay? Chapter 8, powers and duties of the Board of County Commissioners. And this is very brief. I'm not going to read the whole thing. 31-802, supervision of county officers. So they're talking about now the responsibility of the Board of County Commissioners to supervise the official conduct of all county officers and appointed boards or commissions. Guess what? That was challenged in court, and it was turned down. So what I'm telling you is, I have no authority over the other elected officials. The only authority that we have is over their budgets. So for example, if we have a problem with another official, another elected official, the only authority we have is the budget. So let me take an example, and this is highly theoretical. Let's say we have a problem with the sheriff. And I say, okay, Sheriff, I don't like what you're doing, we disagree, whatever the reason is, we're going to cut your budget. Why would I do that? If I cut his budget and he reduces his patrol officers, now I'm putting residents at risk. So the lever that I have is not a true lever, because if I cut, and I'm just using the sheriff as an example because that's easiest to understand, is if I do that, I have to realize that there's an inherent risk on the other end. So my point is this. We think that we have control because we elect people, but that is not necessarily true, because I work with these people every day, and I'm telling you, they don't necessarily have accountability to me or Bill or Leslie, and frankly, a little bit less to you. Now, let me go into some examples here. Most of your elected officials, with the exception of county commissioners, because we serve alternating 2 4-year terms, the other 6 serve a 4-year term. If somebody's 6 months into a 4-year term and you're having a problem, what are you going to do? Now, some will say, well, we'll recall him. No, you won't. You'll never succeed in recalling a county official because the bar is so high it won't happen. It does work in very small communities. It does not work in communities of this size. So basically, you're living with this individual for the next 3 or 3.5 years, and then, of course, if you choose to, you can unelect him or her. Let me go through a couple of examples here. And these are examples that potentially put counties at risk. About a month ago, we hosted the IAC, which is the Idaho Association of Counties. And IAC meets 3 times a year. We hosted it up here about a month ago. And one of the issues that comes up, and the issue of typically the greatest liability to counties is with law enforcement, and after that, probably employee lawsuits. And the situation was described to us, and I believe it was Nez Perce County, where there was a prisoner who was suffering, was mentally handicapped, if you will, and was having issues and was essentially clamoring for help. The deputies were ignoring this particular individual. Turns out he died. ICRIMP, which is the organization that insures basically most of the jurisdictions in the state of Idaho, paid out over $2 million because the detention deputies were not paying attention. They should have been trained. They should have paid attention. This individual was screaming for help. Okay, where's the accountability? That sheriff remained in office. I think he was subsequently unelected, but you couldn't do anything with that individual. We had a situation right here in the county 3 years ago where one individual, one other elected official, would not cooperate with one of our direct employees where it involved financial information, which of course we own, right? We own the budgets, the Board of County Commissioners. We couldn't get the cooperation we needed. So what's my option? Sue. Well, who's going to sue him? I can't use our internal attorneys because that's a conflict. So we had to go outside, enlist counsel. Counsel came, turns out that he wrote a letter, the individual backed off. If that individual had not backed off, we would have both had to enlist attorneys, and you, the taxpayer, would have paid for it. So once again, I ask you, where's the accountability? By the way, most of you didn't know this happened. You couldn't know that it happened, okay? It's not the sort of thing that we publicize. What about an elected official who's interviewing and asks about a person's party affiliation? Is it illegal? No. Is it wrong? I think so. What does it matter? You're hiring somebody to do a job. Does it matter if they're Democrat or Republican? If you're going under the knife, are you going to ask the surgeon what his or her political party is? We've had that happen. And so I'm giving you examples that are real-life examples of this whole question of accountability, because if we don't have it and we have direct interaction with other elected officials, I submit to you that the only accountability you have is the next time that individual's re-election comes up, and that's assuming you have the information. If you don't have the information, then how are you making your decision? Are you making it on the basis of that individual's political ideology, or are you making it on their ability to do the job? I look at an individual based on their ability to do the job. That's how we hire. So let me try and give you a couple of examples. And I talk about accountability, but this clearly goes into other areas such as continuity. What I'm holding up here is a master facility study, okay? This was done in 2012, 10 years ago. It was a study basically encompassing and addressing our entire county facilities, particularly the downtown campus, but the sheriff's facilities as well. It's an $80,000 document. You know what happened with it? Nothing. Guess what? Now we're looking at building the building. If we had acted, I wasn't here then, obviously, this is a prior board. If action had been taken on this at that time, it would cost the county maybe 1/3 to 1/2 what it's going to cost us now, given current construction costs. Now, why didn't that happen? Why wasn't it addressed? Number one, it's a question of time. You're running day-to-day operations. Secondly, and this is very interesting, I'm going to sidestep for a moment. When Bill and Leslie were voted in, a couple of months before they took office, they had to go through a 2-day orientation. And that's put on by ICRIMP, our insurer. And so I accompanied them down to Moscow where it was held. It was for county commissioners and clerks. And I sat at a table with 2 other elected officials from another county, introduced myself, and they said, "Oh, you're from Kootenai? You eat your own up there." And we do. We turn over county commissioners, you lose continuity, things don't get done, prices rise, and basically things fall apart. And this is just one example, and I can give you others. Here's an example of a meeting that took place back in December of 2007, so we're going back 14 years. And the discussion had to do with whether the checkbook was being reconciled. Nobody was reconciling the county checkbook. And guess what? Who knows if it happened? Is it happening today? Honestly, I don't know. I assume it's happening in the auditor's office, but how would I know? Because once again, where's the level of accountability? Where was the accountability here? Because everybody's bogged down in day-to-day operations. Hopefully somebody addressed it, but we don't know that, okay? Let's go back to 1988. Now we're going to get into the subject of efficiency, but I think you heard quite a bit about that from Dan and Jay, okay? This is a meeting that occurred, Board of County Commissioners, back in April 1988. Kootenai County BOCC at their meeting reviewed their request that the county waive the fee for the copying of county records in regard to your study of gypsy moths. Is that what you want your county commissioners to do? One individual can make that decision. Why do you have to convene a meeting of 3 people? That's absolutely inefficient, okay? Makes absolutely no sense. Let's keep going, folks. And again, these are a handful. They're not necessarily cherry-picked. December of 1988, another meeting that occurred stated that the lease for the county public defender's office between Kootenai County and public defender is set up on a graduated basis for 3-year terms. 1988, we were leasing a facility for our public defender. Guess what? We still are. They've outgrown the facility. In December of this year, they move into a new facility. We don't have space for them. You're paying $16,000 a month to rent that facility because there are about 65 people. And again, there's certain protocols that have to be maintained. There's constitutional requirements for a public defender, and obviously that's something. But what happened then? It got away from people. Why did it get away? Probably turning over county commissioners, not enough time to deal with the day, or caught up in the day-to-day operations, and not enough time to focus on the planning. So let's move on. We can get into the question of control. Here's another one. Now this is actually more current. Normally we budget for new positions and new hires. Well, halfway through the year, largely because of COVID and the acceleration of people moving into the community, we actually gave 49 mid-year increases. Those mid-year increases that we gave to the employees were not budgeted. Say, well, why weren't they budgeted? Well, probably nobody forecasted COVID, but the fact of the matter is they should have been budgeted. This should not be happening because, in fact, how do you operate if you're going to have mid-year increases and other expenses that remain unbudgeted? And again, how much time do we have to get into each individual's business to find out and determine what's going on? There should be one individual that's doing this, that's writing these people on a day-to-day basis, okay? I can go through other examples. And some of these are expenditures that occur on a weekly basis. Some of them are absolutely absurd. Over $6,000 of expenses that occurred in 1 week that are basically, you might say in a broad sense, budgeted, but nobody has the time because, once again, we're 3 people that have to convene and don't have the time to jump into the budget to see what's actually being spent. Now, are they overspending? Who knows? But the fact of the matter is these are things that are being addressed, they're being budgeted, but not necessarily scrutinized, okay? North Idaho Trophy, and this is recent, February of this year, $683. 10 custom cherry gun display boxes for retirees at $65 a piece. You know what that's for? That's for retiring deputies. When a deputy retires, it's traditionally, we give that deputy their weapon and their badge. Now they want display boxes for the weapons. That is not necessary. Why didn't we know that? Because it was budgeted. Once again, how much time do we have to get involved in every individual line item? And I can go on with some of these. The point is I'm not trying to pick on any particular department, okay? How about an under-desk elliptical machine, $349 from Amazon? Why? Okay? Who has the time to look into this? So once again, and I can go through these one by one, and let me try to pick out some others that are probably more glaring. 4 electric standing desk frames at $279 each. Why is that necessary? When I moved into my office, they decided on the paint color. I didn't even change my chair. I have the same chair, I have the same desk. I've incurred no expense in moving into that office, but some people are obviously budgeting for these. Once again, these are other elected officials, okay? I can go on. And I don't want to bother you or burden you with a lot of other facts here, but these are situations that occur. Creative Office Solutions, $8,700, 8 guest chairs at $559 a piece. Okay, who's putting in for these? I'm not going to pick on any particular department, but this is what goes on. Once again, they get budgeted, but because we don't have the time trying to run day-to-day operations to scrutinize every individual budget. Now, fortunately, last year we took a 0% tax increase, and we were able to do that. Maybe we made cuts that perhaps we shouldn't have made.
Please don't interrupt.
Okay. I can go through some more. CW Wraps and Marketing, $7,000, okay. Final billing for the first 10 patrol vehicles have white doors. Okay, so we spent $7,000 to repaint the new deputy vehicles, or maybe they were the existing deputy vehicles, to change the patrol vehicles to white doors. Why is that necessary? And the removal of other door graphics. How about this one? Correctional Health Partners. Now, these are the folks that look after the health needs, if you will, of our inmates in the prison. And that was overspent last year by $219,000. And by the way, that tends to happen every year. Why isn't it budgeted? The fact of the matter is we have to pay. You cannot ignore an inmate's illness or potential issue because, once again, we're dealing with due process, we're dealing with potentially high liability. And I can go on and on. Here's another one that strikes me. Okay, so today, actually, we were in the process of wrapping up our fiscal year 22 budget. And so, year to date, this is now ammunition and gun supplies, a little over $20,000, okay? Year to date, we've spent 11. There are about 3 months left to the fiscal year. So next year, they're forecasting basically an increase of $15,000 to $35,000. Why? If you've only spent 11 grand year to date, why are you forecasting 35,000? Okay, now we happen to have caught this one, all right? So once again, we talk about accountability. If it's a struggle for us, it's a bigger struggle for you because it's just a fact of life. You don't have the visibility that we have, and frankly, we don't have total visibility as to what goes on with another elected official. So I've attempted to address a couple of areas, both qualifications and accountability. Let me talk about continuity. This is very important. When we talk about continuity, what that means is because we have elected, with the case of county commissioners, we have alternating 2- and 4-year terms. And the reason for that is because the legislature set up a system so that you never have more than 2 new county commissioners coming in at one time. The amount of information that has to be absorbed is voluminous, and a lot of it is complex. And so what happens is you have to have one that basically has the knowledge. And so when Bill and Leslie came in, I was that individual because I'd already been here for 2 years, and still a challenge. So what happens, though, is if we're turning over county commissioners as often as we do here in Kootenai County, and by the way, when I've met county commissioners in other counties, it's not uncommon for these people to have been in office 10, 12, 14 years. We don't have that reputation here. We turn them over. And incidentally, some deserve to be turned over, but that's a whole other matter, okay? So what happens is you lose this level of continuity. If you have a manager, that individual is ensuring that you have continuity. So the measures that are passed or the budgets that are passed and the specific activities that are funded, that individual has the knowledge to be able to say, okay, this is where we are. Now, that's not to say that a future board can't change that, but the fact of the matter is you still have that knowledge. Again, it's continuity, and that's what it comes down to. There's also the, and I'm probably skipping over some of the items. I think there were a couple of points that were made that I kind of want to clarify from last week when both Dan and Leslie spoke. The point was made that this was presented to the voters twice and it failed. That is not true. It was presented once. Back in the 90s, the recommendation was made to go to the voters. It never went to the voters. The Board of County Commissioners decided not to put it to the voters. In 2012, it went to the voters, and it went down 2-1. I think it was like 67 to 33%. So I just wanted to correct that. We also have other decisions that are made that basically take up a lot of staff time. Years ago, for example, the decision, not the decision, but it was contemplated to move the fairgrounds, if you will, from its current location out to the prairie. And no decision was ever made. It was contemplated, whatever. And the fair board has always been concerned about losing land. Well, guess what? Little by little, they do lose land. They lost land to the jail expansion, and they're going to lose another 2 acres to Kootenai County Fire and Rescue. Now, I don't think there are any plans inherent to take any more land from them, but that is a concern. And that is something that should have been addressed years ago. Should they have been moved to the fairgrounds? I don't know. But that's a planning function. So the commissioners, too busy running day-to-day operations, couldn't put the necessary plans in place to try and address something like that. And this is within this whole scope of long-term planning. Let me see, what else can I address for you? Dan Green made the comment, and I think both he and Leslie made the comment that, you know, it's interesting that over time, the county will potentially shrink because the cities are annexing or will have to annex territory from the county. That is true, but let's consider the activities and the functions that we perform for the entire county. There's not just land use, because land use, by the way, is confined strictly to the unincorporated areas. What about budgets? What about Board of Equalization? Every year, for 2 weeks, we sit as the Board of Equalization, and that's where, by statute, people are permitted to come and appeal their values, not their taxes, that's different, their values. So that's a 2-week period, and that affects everybody in the county. So it could be an individual from Rathdrum, it could be an individual from Post Falls, it doesn't matter. So we hear that for 2 weeks. Our prosecutor handles all criminal prosecutions for the county, including the cities, all right? We also, by the way, we serve our constituents in other regards. So we have city residents that own property in the county. So when we make land use decisions, we're affecting them as well. What about DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles? What about driver license? We do that, and we service the entire county as we do that. The recorder's office, marriage licenses, closings, real estate closings, the jury duty, jury selection, we handle that as well. What about the treasurer? He's collecting taxes for the entire county. By the way, in case you wonder, our take of your tax bill, just for the county, is about 25%. We collect for everyone, we distribute to the other taxing entities, each of which has their own commissioners, fire district, highway district, water districts, but we collect for the entire county. And of course, the assessor, he is assessing property for the entire county. And by statute, every year, 20% of the county has to be reassessed. So 20% of the county of the property gets visited every year. So every 5 years, 100% of the county is fully reassessed. So these are activities that we continue to perform. I'll make a couple of final points, if I may. And one of them is on the question of, and I think I addressed the question of representation. People are concerned that they may lose their representation. Right now, if you want to talk representation to the degree that you believe in it, you've got 3 county commissioners. Do you get greater representation with 5 or 7 or less? I say you get more. Because now you're distributing that control, and it's easier for constituents to access one of those county commissioners. So if you increase the number, and I'm not saying that's the right way to go because it really depends on the broader structure, but in general, if you increase the number of commissioners, you basically spread the control and you increase people's representation, if you want to talk about that. I want to talk about control. This is very important to me. Right now, with 3 county commissioners, any individual, any group, and this is one of my big concerns, Republican or Democrat, that gains 2 county commissioners takes control of the county. That is not good, and I'm going to tell you why. How many of you remember the ill-fated Uniform Land Use Code of 10 years ago? Okay. Very controversial. I won't go into it, but there was a consultant hired and was working with our then community development organization, Planning and Zoning, to basically redefine our land use code for the unincorporated, that is to say, the rural part of the county, and the zoning that went with it. It was highly controversial. Anyway, it was essentially abandoned. But during that discussion, there were a couple of individuals who came forth and said the county should be one zone. Really? So if I live on 5 acres, do I want a rock quarry next door? How about a gas station? How about a dump? The fact of the matter is, if you turn this county into a single zone, anything goes. Right now, we have multiple zones. We have rural, 5-acre minimum, ag suburban, 2-acre minimum, restricted residential, that's typically shoreline, 5 units per acre, which, by the way, is stupid. That's a different topic. And so the county has zones, and that's what helps preserve your value in a certain character and quality of life. If you go to a single zone, that spells disaster. Let me take a second step. Every year, by law, we are required to revisit the comprehensive plan. That's the land use comprehensive plan. And so we did that back in the fall, and in the course of that discussion, somebody recommended, and I'm going to call a spade. It came out of the Northwest Property Alliance group, that individuals be granted primacy when it comes to their land. If you have primacy, you can never be challenged. That, folks, is dangerous. If I have primacy, what's to stop me from polluting my land and affecting my neighbors? Nowhere in these United States will you find a land use code that includes primacy. Sure enough, somebody in Idaho wanted to insert that. And in a 2-to-1 vote, we decided no freaking way. Now, some of you may disagree. That's your privilege. But you grant primacy and watch what happens. And so these are things that are very important. Again, I'm taking this back to the issue of control. So if you want to distribute the control, if you want to make it harder for people to take control of this county, whether it be an individual, a group, I don't care if it's Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, doesn't matter. You increase the number of commissioners. And I'm going to leave it at that because I haven't even touched the subject necessarily of an administrator. But I'm trying to indicate to you that if you get 2 votes today on this commission, you have control. And I think that is dangerous. And that is my take, and I think exceeded my time by 10 minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Filios. Commissioner Brooks?
No, when are we going to have questions?
As soon as you have finished your statement.
Okay, mine's going to be short and sweet. For the most part, I agree with what Chris said. He summed it up very nicely. I've been really interested in taking advantage of the Idaho state statutes and looking at.
Microphone?
Pardon?
Can you use the
Oh,
microphone?
can you not hear
You're
him?
not here? Oh, I'm sorry.
You may want to turn off that other one on the desk,
Yeah.
just because you'll get some feedback.
That's mute. Did you have to mute? There you go. There we go. Is that better?
That's good.
Go right ahead.
I'm sorry. Before I was a county commissioner, looked at what we were doing here in Kootenai County in terms of the form of our government and realized that having 3 commissioners didn't work very well for a lot of reasons. But once I decided that, I'll go into why it doesn't work well. I looked at the Idaho state statutes, and it clearly offers 7 different forms of government that are completely legal and should be looked at. It was done once in 1996, but they also suggested that most of the elected officials would be hired. And instead of that happening, most of the elected officials did everything they could to sabotage that program. They didn't do education. They didn't talk about it. They didn't get it out to the public, and it did fail. Right now, as it is, I can't go and have a cup of coffee with Chris or with Leslie and talk about anything because it's considered a illegal meeting. We have a quorum of the commissioners, and it has to be noticed, and it has to be people taking minutes, and I can't trade ideas. And I need to trade ideas as an elected official and as a county commissioner. If we had 3 or 5, 5 or 7, I could do that, and it would be very helpful. Right now, long-range planning is absolutely non-existent because you can't do long-range planning looking at your organization in 2-year chunks. Every 2 years, it changes and can change, and usually does change. When I got here, I noticed that human resources was under the prosecuting attorney. Now, I've never heard of anything like that in my life. And I called in Barry McHugh, the prosecuting attorney, and said to him, Barry, I don't understand. Please explain to me, how is HR under your department? And he looked at me and he said, because the county, he didn't say anything bad, but he said the county commission, as it's sets, is so unstable that our HR function would cease to function. So it was placed under the prosecuting attorney. As far as my background, I was in the military for almost 6 years in intelligence. I was a linguist. And I then went to college, the University of Illinois, and have a degree in psychology and statistics. I got out. I started working for WILL, AM, FM, and TV in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, which is a rather large organization. I went from there to managing a public radio station in Anchorage. And I was one of the few conservatives in public broadcasting, so that didn't last too long. But made some major changes there to help them survive. I went from there to a group called the Matanuska Telephone Association, which is a large, second largest telephone cooperative in the country. And eventually ended up on their 5-member board that controls the entire cooperative. And I got a good lesson in organizational management and what works and what doesn't work. I went from there to Valley Hospital in Palmer, same town, and they ran through 13 administrators in 12 years. They had no stability whatsoever. Every time somebody got fired at the hospital and somebody else got fired, those 2 people got on the board and got rid of the administrator. And this went on for 12 years. So we changed the makeup of the board so that you had to be on the citizens board for 3 or 4 years, and then you could be on the operating board. So if somebody were just angry, they really had to be angry for a long time to have some effect. And what happened is we ended up stabilizing the hospital. We went from a $12 million a year deficit when I first got there to a $12 million a year surplus when I left. A lot of people go, we want to elect our sheriff. I can understand that. I know some people do want to elect their sheriff. On the other hand, if that's so important, what about electing our police chiefs? Why don't we do that? We don't elect our police chiefs in Coeur d'Alene or Post Falls or Hayden. Those people are hired and they can be fired, which I think is a much better system. But bottom line is, I'm willing to do and put forward to a vote of the people of Kootenai County whatever, and endorse and work for whatever the recommendation of this commission is. Okay, I have my own favorite, but I haven't been in here interjecting it, and I hesitate to, because it's your job to come up with a plan. No change or other changes. And when you do, not knowing what it is, I'll tell you, I will endorse it, work for it, vote for it, and do the best I can to see that it gets in front of all the people of Kootenai County. And if people don't like it in Kootenai County, it's called vote no. Very simple. There has been, since the beginning of this, just bringing it up, a lot of misinformation. And that really doesn't serve the purpose. Some people came to this study commission with one goal, and that is to kill this idea. And they weren't able to kill it. They weren't able to kill it. So what they've done so far is people in general who were opposed to this at all from the beginning, they've behaved like a pack of jackals attacking a zebra. No one can kill it, but if they all latch onto it, maybe it'll bleed to death and fall. So I'm hoping that doesn't continue to be the way some people view this endeavor. People that I appointed to this commission, I asked to be on it, but I did not quiz them in terms of their politics or what outcome they wanted. So I tried to pick good people that I knew would consider this stuff very carefully, and I appreciate the amount of time you all have put into it. I mean, I look at I watch, but this is the first one I've shown up at. But I don't comment. I don't comment to any of you, and I don't comment to the press or anybody else. This is your commission. You decide. But thank you for doing what you're doing. Someone said to me, if this thing goes right, it'll be just about as fascinating as dry toast. And that's my hope.
Thank you. We'll open to questions. We'll go counterclockwise. Start with Joan.
Just one question. Last week in Commissioner Duncan's testimony, she stated that recently there had been 4 new positions hired. I believe possibly Nancy's position. I think she said a financial analyst and a couple of others. I don't recall the names of those positions. And she said with those positions having been brought on, she felt she had enough support for the day-to-day administrative functions and the research that needed to be done in order for her to be effective without changing our current format. And I wanted to know if you feel those added positions have helped you in your day-to-day administrative functions.
Do you want to answer?
Yeah, I think we're trading water right now. I don't think they've improved anything at all. When I first time met with the city manager of Hayden, I said to him, what qualifies you to be a city manager? He goes, I have 2 degrees, a bachelor's and a master's in government, this sort of public policy. I said, well, that's pretty good. He said, I also have a law degree. I said, that's pretty good. He said, I have 15 years experience managing cities. So I think I'm pretty good at what I do by now. And I think I'm serving the people of Hayden very well.
Right, and I can jump in. Did they help you? Absolutely. We get a level of analysis, especially with the hiring of Nancy Pluff, that we didn't have before, which is what helps us identify some of the expenditures where we can save money and things of that nature. But that basically is assistance for day-to-day operations. The fact of the matter is, it doesn't free us up for the long-range planning. And that's why I cited examples such as, for example, in the past, with the master study that was done for not only just the facilities, but also for the fairgrounds, because once again, it's help, but it's help in the day-to-day. We as commissioners, if we're going to think strategically and longer term, we have to be able to extricate ourselves from the day-to-day. And they can't necessarily pick that up because statute doesn't allow them to do that. I'm glad you asked the question. If you look at Idaho counties, and people have said, well, who else does this, what we're talking about here? The answer is no one. But let's look at this. You have 44 counties. Eliminate 39. They're agricultural counties. They're fairly static. They don't need this. They can operate just the way we operate today. County commissioners meet 1 or 2 days a week, 1 night a week. They can conduct business. You really have to look at the 5 bigger counties, of which we're one. So we're now, by population, we're the 3rd largest. By voting public, we're the 2nd largest. So the thing is, the other counties should be looking at this type of an organization or a potential restructure if that's what you conclude is necessary. But the way it currently operates, that assistance helps us in the day-to-day, but it doesn't allow us to be replaced so that we can concentrate on the longer-term strategic planning of the county.
Thank you.
Going on around, Brian? I think this is, I don't mean to leave you out, Mr. Brooks, I think this is primarily directed at Mr. Filios. It sounds like you're in favor of the manager form of government.
Okay.
Is that correct, or, because I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, you can say that, but go ahead.
How does that differ, in your mind, from the county administrator form of government? And why would manager be?
Okay, I'm not drawing a distinction in my mind. Okay, I haven't really gotten that detailed. To answer your question, what I favor, let me sidestep for a moment. If you look at corporate structure in America, you would be hard-pressed to find an organization with 3 CEOs. You probably won't find any with 2. They operate with 1. Now, some people say, but this is government and that's different. No, it's not. When you talk structure and organization, whether it's private or whether it's public, there's really no distinction to be made because the buck has to stop somewhere. So for me, to answer your question, what I believe is you need a county manager, 5 part-time, you can go to 7, I prefer 5, I think 7 is too many, part-time elected officials, and the others, currently elected, not appointed, I don't like that term, hired. Now, you get into the question of sheriff and prosecutor. You might conclude that they should remain elected. If that's what you conclude, that's fine by me.
Okay.
I can look at both sides of that question if you want me to, but that's a decision that you would have to make.
I'm sure that question will come around at some point. But my question, though, was it sounded like you were advocating for the manager situation, and that is a different form of government than the county administrator. So
That's
Actually,
correct.
Brian, hate to interrupt, we have a county commission manager and an executive commission.
With the
Are the
executive.
2 forms.
Right.
So
And-
we don't have a manager administrator, we have a manager or an executive.
Right, and so the executive is the elected official, and you sounded to me like you were advocating for the hired manager.
That is correct, that he would be hired by the county, or she would be hired by the county commissioners.
And you find that preferable to the executive, which is elected by the,
Yeah, because you have to get into the subject of qualifications. And when you get into the subject of qualifications and reviewing resumes and conducting interviews, I think that's very difficult to ask the public to do. I think that's where you need a body of people who are actually going to go through. I mean, we go through that to a lesser extent today. For example, when we had to hire an airport director, we went through 64 resumes to get to the right individual. Now, most of them weren't qualified, but who's going to sit down and do that? If we have to hire a coroner, is the public going to go through and look at the resumes and interview the people? Logically, that would have to rest with the county commissioners. But I second what Bill said. Whatever you guys decide, if you decide it's business as usual and we remain a county commission of 3 people, so be it.
thank you.
Tamara?
Thank you both for coming. I guess this is probably to Mr. Filios as well. You said that you didn't know if the county checkbook was being reconciled. Is that, to you, then that's a lack of accountability and control? as a county commissioner, why can't you just call them and ask?
It's not that we can't call them and ask. The fact is that responsibility doesn't rest with us. It rests with the clerk. And
Okay.
so the assumption today is that it is being done simply because of what we go through and what we see as we go through the budgetary process. But over the years, it wasn't done.
And you're referring back to
Yeah,
prior.
yeah. And it took a while and new county commissioners coming online to make sure that that in fact was being done.
So you just mentioned that you would prefer to have the other elected officials become hired. Can you explain why that would work?
Well, sure,
To you?
because first of all, you have very specific qualifications, okay? So if we talk about, let's talk about the four. You have clerk, assessor, treasurer, coroner, okay? We are the only one or maybe one of two counties in the state where the coroner is a physician, because by law, you don't have to be. Let me also state one other thing. I don't know if you folks realize this. To run as an elected official or for any county position in the state of Idaho, the requirement is 1 year in the state, 30 days in the county, 21 years of age. That's insufficient and frankly outdated. So if you're dealing with certain tasks that have to be performed,
Somebody got a phone going?
hires the VPs that work for that individual. He or she does. Maybe there's board approval. Certainly doesn't go to the shareholders. So why is this any different? You're dealing with skill sets. You need a certain skill set for coroner. You need a certain skill set for treasurer, frankly, even assessor. Which one did I leave out? Clerk, okay, that's a little bit different, but still.
So you're saying that an election does not provide you with the ability to hire appropriate people with those skill sets, only hiring?
Hiring is far preferable.
Because you're,
Because I think often what happens, and we've seen it happen, is when you try to elect certain officials in certain jobs, and I've actually seen emails that have gone back and forth, where someone will say for a particular position, this is a solid conservative. And the answer is, what does it have to do with the job? I'm interested in somebody doing the job. I'm not interested in their political ideology, because that rarely fits into the picture. Occasionally, yeah, in certain cases, probably more so with us as county commissioners than it would with the other electeds. But in our case, you get to vote.
I did have one for Mr. Brooks. You mentioned or drew a connection between the police chiefs and the sheriff. But constitutionally, the sheriff has a lot more power that a police chief does not have. The sheriff can interpose himself between us and the citizens from the federal government and can arrest a federal government or inhibit a federal agency from coming across into his area. A police chief does not have that power. So how do you equate the two when there actually is a very large distinction constitutionally between the two?
There is a lot of misinformation about what is constitutional and what is not. And there are people who are sovereign citizens and Constitutional Party, and they have a completely different belief than the average citizen. So I don't accept that as a problem.
So you see them as equal?
Tamara,
Yes.
try to restrict yourself to one question and one follow-up, and we need to get the
Well, I
rest
was
of the
one
people.
each, so I didn't think
That's
that was an
okay.
issue. Okay.
Go ahead and answer.
But that's my
Okay.
answer.
Thank you.
Kristen?
Thank you both for coming. Each of these meetings has been really interesting to me and important in terms of expanding my knowledge. I think I can count on my colleagues to get into kind of the nitty-gritty, the weeds. I am an administrative manager by career, and so I know exactly what that can bring to the table. My concern and question to you, you've answered this to a point, and if you feel you don't want to say anything more, that's fine. But my question and concern is that why there is so much pushback or concern from the community for us just doing something that we are legally able to do. The two of you voted to set up this group. I assume everyone here is here to do the best job possible. And I don't understand why there needs to be almost intimidation at this point when we haven't even gotten through the question part of this.
I think people believe that they're going to lose their right to elect their officials. I don't believe that's the case. And I think I stated earlier, if you decide to make a change in the optional form, you're necessarily, I suspect, going to go to 5 or 7 county commissioners, which increases, does not decrease, representation. I think that's the simple answer. The other, I think, concern is primarily the sheriff. I think the prosecutor as well, but the sheriff. But again, that's in your hands. If you decide that you want to leave the sheriff as elected, that's what goes to the public for the vote, okay? What I believe in the end, or maybe what Bill believes, or for that matter, Leslie, doesn't matter. You're doing the analysis, and you, by statute, have to compare, if you happen to recommend an optional, to the current form, and basically indicate, the pluses and minuses of the various approaches. When we talk about the sheriff, now this is interesting, and I'll just bring up some conversation. We just passed a waterways ordinance, and it was controversial. There were those who said we did the right thing because it was public safety, we're trying to prevent further property damage, and there are those who say, you're basically inhibiting my ability to enjoy an activity, whatever. So let's say the sheriff says, I'm not going to enforce it. He can choose not to. So if somebody comes to me and says, Filios, they won't enforce it, I'll say, good, call the sheriff. Because I have no authority over him. I'm certainly not going to cut his budget over that. But what if the sheriff worked for us? And he refused. I'd say, Sheriff, you will enforce. And he says, no, I said, you're fired. Now, some people don't like that, but I think their concern is more from the, let's put it, the constitutional side and the ability to stand up to the feds. That's a whole nother issue, and I think maybe that's what people are concerned about. That's the best answer I can give you.
Thank you. Mr. Brooks?
I think the elephant in the room, if you will, is the ascendancy of the Republican extreme right-wing, radical right, excuse me?
Go right ahead, Bill. Keep.
Whatever it is, I can't read it from here. What are you trying to say? Can't read it. What are you trying to say?
We want to speak for ourselves. You're speculating on why the community is here.
At this point, we are not taking public comment. We will be taking public comment later. Please be seated.
You crossed the line when you said that. That is speculation.
I appreciate that. You're very bright. See you later.
Bill? Okay. This is something that I, as a citizen and as a Republican, and I've decided to disassociate myself with the local Republicans because of it. They've taken a very, very, very hard turn to the radical right. And a lot of people are very concerned that they will soon run Kootenai County if we have a 3-commissioner commission. They need 1 commissioner, and they will be in control. Now, I don't want liberal Democrats doing that either. I want a more balanced county commission, but that's, I think, why the hostility and the outbursts and the refusal to let anybody else speak. They tried
It's like chihuahuas with microphones. And it's the same 50 or 60 people that go from knot to place that basically disrupt. They don't go there to discuss.
Thank you.
Christian? Dave? Sherry? I don't mean to cut people off, but we are trying to get this done by 7 so that we have time to continue with the rest of the meeting and do the business that we have skipped the last few weeks. So I'd like to get everybody to get a chance to ask. And that's why I'm trying to restrict the number of questions any one person asks. Sorry, Tamara. Go ahead.
Would the sheriff's responsibilities be affected by being hired versus voted in?
Should not be.
I don't see how.
Satisfied, Sherry?
Thank you.
Brian? Brian?
Yes, I understand. You did get my name.
He knows
correct.
Didn't I get it?
Appreciate you got my name right this week.
You didn't put your nameplate up, so that's why I wondered when you said that.
That's right, I forgot to put that up. Good evening, and thank you for appearing and sharing your insights. I wanted to talk to you about the line of reasoning you were pursuing and about a manager type being in place within the county. Not an elected executive, but a manager hired by the commission, serving at the pleasure of the commission.
Okay.
And as you earlier described, you know, the commissioners have these kind of a hydra type responsibility between legislating and the administration of what is legislated. So they develop policy. A lot of times that's just directed by the state. But as you indicated, you know, like waterway, speed limits, things of this nature, you have the ability to legislate in this regard. But then you also are to administer, and you're saying this occupies a lot of time, and you're also saying, I think, that a good example is if the sheriff doesn't want to, decides that ordinance for waterway speed enforcement is something that is appropriate to enforce, not going to, and you can do nothing about it, right? Okay, so how does say a manager hired by the commission change any of that? Does that functionally change something? A few weeks ago, we heard from the county treasurer who articulated that I really don't care if they hire a manager or not to help coalesce or facilitate discussions. I'm not going to listen to them because I answer directly to the people through an election. I'm not answering to some manager. So to me, let me just continue on, because there's a question in here, which is there are other roles that you have as the Board of Commissioners where there's a whole branch under you that you're kind of directly responsible for, boards and commissions and things of this nature. And is that where the manager would plug in and facilitate and help you most? Is that what you envision in your notion of let's hire a manager to help you with all those responsibilities, not necessarily the ones where you interact with line elected officials, but the branch under the commissioners that you directly administer? Is that where that manager would perform most functions and be most helpful in your opinion?
Okay, I think I sense a few questions in your questions.
Well,
so-
just that last one. Is that where you would most envision a manager being helpful?
Because we could do that now.
Okay, where else
We
did
could
you
hire that
envision that
individual
role?
today.
So let me just clarify that. Where would you envision a manager being most helpful in the performance of your duties as commissioners?
Basically running the day-to-day operations of the county, which involves administration, budget. When you get into the land use decisions and things of a quasi-judicial nature, that's still going to rest with the Board of County Commissioners. And I think statute has something to say to that. Let me also respond to your earlier point, because I questioned Steve Matheson on that point. And I said, where are you coming from with that, Steve? And he clarified it. What I think he was trying to say is if we ask him to do something that he perceives is illegal or unconstitutional, yeah, he can refuse. That's not likely. In the 4.5 years that I've been here and worked with Steve, that has never arisen. He gives his opinion. He might say you could do this or you could do that. And if the particular course of action is consistent with statute, we're fine. But to answer your question, what I envision, if we wanted to hire somebody today to sit between us and the 17 departments that work for us, we could do that today. We don't need to go for public approval. We have that authority. But we have not exercised that authority, and that's why we're going through the effort with the study commission.
So I guess the question I have is, why not? Because it's within your power to do it. You don't need to convene a special commission to deliberate about, what is the current form and whether or not the other options.
I think the answer really goes back to accountability, because right now, we have very little leverage, and I think I explained that as I went through earlier, with the other elected officials. If you have a hired manager, a CEO, if you will, a chief operating officer, or a chief executive officer, that individual now has leverage because those individuals work for him, or her, as the case may be. So you have greater accountability.
But that presumes that the line officials that are currently elected would not be elected, right?
That is correct.
So what if it wasn't that way? What if they remained elected and there was a manager that was brought in? How would you see that functioning or not functioning?
I don't
Do you see that
think-
as reasonable?
I'm sorry?
Do you see that as a reasonable solution to the problems that you described?
It's one solution. I don't know if it's going to entirely solve the accountability problem, but it might. It might solve part of it. Again, if that individual is elected, how do you know you're getting the most qualified individual for that position? Who is going to review the resumes? Are the public going to do that?
But at the same time, a experienced manager or administrator might look at what the treasurer is doing, elected or hired, and say, there's a better way to do that. Let's have that discussion. As it is now, we just kind of, it's up to chance whether the expertise on the county commission is sufficiently broad and detailed enough to know about what the treasurer is doing. Somebody with experience in that regard can point out some things, some efficiencies, or some better ways to serve the people that we're not aware of. I didn't take a degree in how to become a county commissioner. There's nothing like that. It's just accumulation of what I've learned over decades.
And really, when you get right down to it, many people, half of Americans own stock or mutual funds. Well, when you do that, you bought into the capitalist system. You bought into the free enterprise system. How does that system operate? Board of trustees, single CEO, hired execs. Basically, that's what we would be doing. If the system works and has served the country that well for over 200 years that we invest in it, why would it be any different at the government level? I rest my case.
Bruce? I don't think I want to get into that.
That's okay. We can disagree.
Yeah. Some might suggest otherwise.
Okay, fair enough. Again, your decision. You're going to do the analysis, and we abide by your decision.
In the manager form where all the line officials remain elected, do you see that as something that could work? Or would that simply lead to line officials ignoring that manager that was hired and saying, get out of my business?
If they reported to him?
No, they're still elected.
They're elected.
Oh, I'm sorry, the line officials are still elected? Oh, yeah. Sure, they can tell him to pound sand. Absolutely.
So I don't see that as a reasonable formulation.
It would be a problem. I don't know that it solves anything over and above what we have today. I think something that goes unnoticed is why in the 90s did the legislature feel in their wisdom, and I mean that very sincerely, that they should identify another form of government and do it in a very detailed fashion. There are pages upon pages written about the optional form of government, how to structure it, and how it should function. Why did they do that? They could have left it alone. They could have said, leave it as it is, 3 county commissioners, traditional form. Why? Somebody must have acknowledged that maybe there's a better way, and especially perhaps a better way for those counties that are growing. I can't answer that. I don't know what their thought process was at the time.
I've looked
but
for the
obviously-
legislative history, there is none that I can find.
Okay.
So I can't answer your question.
And it's the sort of thing that, back when this county was formed, the state was formed, 1890, women didn't vote, no electricity, no cars, 4,000 people, I think, in the county. And it's been said that it's good old boy politics. And I'd rather say it has a very pejorative meaning or sound. I would rather say it was pickle barrel politics, where 3 people, 3 men sat around and decided what they thought was best for the county. I don't think they had the meetings minute. People weren't taking minutes, and they weren't noticed. But it worked. But it was a different time and a different place.
First of all, thank you both for being here. I'd like to just touch on a couple of the things that you've said, and then I have a question. Commissioner Felios, you said what I believe doesn't matter, but that's actually not true. What you both believe does matter, because this commission is here to get information so that we can make a decision, and that's why you're here. That's why we invited you here. So what you say does matter, and what you believe. You mentioned that people are fearful of losing the ability to elect their officials. Well, under the proposed form of government that you have a preference for, that's exactly what would happen. They would lose their ability to elect their treasurer, their prosecutor, their sheriff, their assessor, and those people. So I don't think it's accurate when you make statements like that. We're looking at a different form of government. I'm very open to the idea. I want to truly understand what is wrong with our current form, besides the fact that maybe we're spending $900 on a toilet seat like the federal government does, with some inefficiencies here and there. But what we also have is a system that's set up where different elected officials can counter other elected officials. You gave a number of examples of your hypothetical if there's a problem with a sheriff. Well, what if there's a problem with a commissioner? Under a form of government where we have a county manager, for example, and you have these elected commissioners, who's holding them accountable? Certainly not the county manager, because he can lose his job. And if everyone else underneath that county manager is now hired as opposed to elected, well, then you no longer have anyone who's really having a check against the county commissioners in that sense, except the constituents who have to wait until the next election to get rid of those people. Okay, so, that's one of the things that I kind of like about this form of government. I'll be upfront about that, but I'm trying to find ways to say, okay, what's really wrong? So, for example, in December 3rd, Steve Matheson actually did say he was not going to pay for paving on some property that the county had taken over because the taxes weren't paid. And one of the reasons he didn't want to pay for the paving, which came out to about $65,000, these are the minutes from the meeting, is that the county is not involved in maintaining properties that it has taken where taxes weren't paid. It just happened that a county official who was hired and not elected owns 2 parcels next to that property where they wanted basically a driveway to be paved on it. And
It's a county employee, not a county official.
employee, fine, but it's still somebody that I'm sure each of you know. And so Steve Matheson said, I ain't doing it. It's not right. And so there was an opportunity where an elected official countered what the commissioners wanted, because you see, you just got done saying that if the sheriff reported to you.
What's your question?
I'm getting to the question,
well,
okay?
please.
And he didn't refuse. He came to a meeting and said to us, this would not be a good idea. And we agreed with him.
Well, but that's in essence saying, as treasurer, he strongly opposes spending any money to maintain this property.
That's the way we work together.
Yeah.
He didn't say, I refuse.
Yes.
He said, here's why. These are the reasons. And I think all three of us said, that's a good argument.
Yes. And so my point is that if this treasurer worked for the commissioners, then he would just do it, and there wouldn't be any stopping it, in a sense. No different than if you hire the sheriff. You want the waterways to be patrolled, you tell the sheriff, or like you said, he'll lose his job, he'll get fired, which is what a police chief, in essence, gets done. I mean, you said that just now. Okay, and so my question is how do the commissioners get held accountable by other government officials if we look at a different form of government that's different than what we have now?
Okay, so let me try to segment and answer your question. Okay, first, I think you made the statement that my opinion didn't matter.
No, it does matter.
It does matter, right.
Yes, you said it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter in the end. In the end, whatever decision you make, I will abide by.
Sure.
My opinion does matter as you go through your decision-making process.
Yes.
Hopefully. If it doesn't, that's up to you guys. Okay. Secondly, the situation that you just raised about who holds the commissioners responsible, well, at some point, it stops with the people. Once again, let's go back to the corporate example. If you have a corporation, who votes on the board of trustees of the corporation? The people. Well, in their case, the shareholders. In this case, the residents. So ultimately, it does go back to the people. If it doesn't go back to the people, well, who does it go to at that point?
But it's less to the people when you have fewer elected officials. When you have, I mean, if you were to go to 5 county commissioners and then take away the other 6 elected positions, it really is, it becomes bureaucratic in some sense, and it also takes away that accountability to the people from each of these different silos within the county structure.
Well,
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, you're right to use the word silos, and that's what exists today, and that's part of the problem. So what I'm saying is, if you have 5 county commissioners, you're actually increasing the representation, if you want to call it that, and you're distributing it on a greater basis across the county. So the fact that they're not electing those other 4 or several officials doesn't mean they're losing representation, any more than shareholders lose representation when they elect the board of trustees to whom the CEO reports. It's no different.
Yeah, I understand. So what about my question, which was, how do the commissioners get checked outside of, because, for example, you talk about accountability, like the checking account. I know, but I guess the question I'm getting at is that when you have a different form, you talked about how the checking account, we assume it's set up or, it's accounted for properly. To me, that seems like a sunlight issue and not another official being accountable for it. That it needs to be exposed so that the public can see someone hasn't been handling a checking account correctly. And my point is, how do you hold these how do people know what's going on inside government if no one speaks up because for fear of being fired by that county manager or by fear of being fired by a commissioner? How are we going to know what's not going right inside government?
I'm telling you, you don't know now. That's my whole point. Okay, let's go back to your original question, which, if I understood it correctly, I think, were you trying to ask who's holding the county commissioners accountable?
At this point, yes. Who would hold them accountable?
It's no different than today. Today, you're holding 3 of us accountable. Now, do you know what we're doing? No, there's only so much visibility that you can have. And whether it's 3 or 5 or 7, you're still limited by what you can observe. I don't know how else to answer your question.
So then, if there's no accountability, I'm just trying to understand, if there's no accountability now, how is a different form of government going to change that?
Because ultimately, it still has to come back to a vote. and the vote is for the county commissioners. You're voting for us now, you would be voting for us or them in the future.
But we wouldn't know under this new form of government what's going on. What you said is we don't know what's going on now.
We're going in circles. What's going to then why don't you dissolve government and call it Marxist?
That's not what I'm asking for. What I'm asking for is how are people going to know that things aren't working properly under a different form of government, presumably the one that you have a preference for?
Because you will have a greater degree of accountability because those that are currently elected that are now being managed by a CEO are accountable to that individual. So for those individuals, they have accountability to the county manager. The county manager in turn has accountability to the county commissioners. The county commissioners now have an accountability to the public, just as we do today. But today, you don't have visibility into what those other county officials are doing.
Would we have it under that proposed form of government?
Yes, because you're going to have a manager that's directly overseeing those.
Is it because someone says, it all looks good to me, or is it going to be because the public gets to see this information?
How is this any different than what you have in the corporate world? Are you saying we ought to revolutionize and change?
The corporate world opens their books up. They get audited all the time.
Goodness gracious, so do we. Every meeting is public and open.
That's different than the books.
It's more deniability.
Bruce, it's almost 7 o'clock, please.
Yeah, I think.
We're getting repetitive. Please try to wrap
It's
up your
fine.
question.
I guess I got the answer to my question.
Is it that the manager, which has a full-time day-to-day role overseeing all of these, what are now not
Sure.
elected line officials, is deep in it every day, all day?
That is correct.
And is accountable to the board, is what you're saying. And so
That is
that
correct.
line of, that manager is the eyes and ears and serves at the pleasure of these commissioners. And therefore, it is presumed that provides a better measure of accountability than what we have now. What you're saying is that, everyone's elected independently in these line offices, but nobody really knows what's going on. If you focus it under a manager who rides herd over all these people and supervises them day to day, you think that there's going to be a better understanding of day-to-day operations
Yeah,
and
there's no
accountability.
question.
You think that?
Yeah, there's no question, because today, if we want to pry or probe into an individual's finances, even though we have the statutory authority to do that, if that individual says to us, I'm sorry, I'm not going to share that, and I gave that example earlier, what do you think happens? We have to sue. We have to contract outside and sue that individual to get the information.
Or FOIA them?
I'm sorry?
Public records request?
We could do a public records request, but that's not necessarily going to force compliance. We're going
So
to
no other county in Idaho has adopted one of the alternate optional forms that is allowed under the Idaho code. And a few weeks ago, an individual, Mr. Ryan, was in and said, take a look at Ada County where they.
Oh, I can
they've
answer
looked
that
at
for
this.
you.
And so I wanted to inquire of that because I just was curious about that. It sounded good, what he was saying about Ada County hasn't gone this direction and they're comparable to us. And why don't you guys talk to them, which we intend to do, about why it is they've been able to manage the same kind of form of government that we have now, and yet they have a chief operating officer, something to that effect, and have done well. And so he was sharing that with us, and I just wanted to bring that up and say, let's hear your perspective on why is that Ada County doing it successfully or not, or under our current form of government? Why
Okay,
have
so
they
basically.
not done with another?
Okay, so I spoke with one of my counterparts, Kenyon, who's a county commissioner down there. And in the most recent election, the Diana Lechiando, who was a Democrat, was narrowly defeated. So you have two Republicans. And the one who was recently elected, I don't mind telling you, has already had a couple of bouts with the AG's office. So now I'm going to take you back to the issue of control. I'm going to give you a straight answer. This is my perspective. You got two Republicans, they've got control. Why would they change it? There's no incentive for them to change their form of government because they have that very control that I warned about earlier. Bingo. There's your answer.
But
That's my
Not
take.
interrupt.
But wouldn't the same happen with 5 commissioners and three getting elected as Republicans?
Gentlemen, Bruce,
Yeah.
Brian, it's 7 o'clock. We were trying
can
to
respond.
fan the questioning by this time.
know,
Please, let's not be repetitive. Let's let other people have a chance to ask.
Repetitive.
I can respond to that.
Go ahead.
It's harder to get 3 than it is to get 2.
Why? I mean, I
That's
don't
purely
understand.
mathematical. If I have to answer that, you got to be
Well,
kidding.
every election has every election has.
It is easier to get control if you have to get 2 than if you have to get 3. It's that simple.
No, I'm talking about to elect them, not to have control. If your concern is about electing another person, and you've said this on video before, I mean, it's, I actually appreciate your candor on that. But if you're concerned about electing another Leslie Duncan, for example, well, what's to prevent just electing 3 Leslie Duncans?
You can't totally prevent that, but you make it more difficult. If you have to get 3 out of 5 versus 2 out of 3, it means you have to win 3 seats versus 2. Theoretically, that's a bigger challenge. That's all I'm saying. If you go to 7 commissioners, to get control, you need 4. Harder to get 4 than to get 2. That, I think, is just a mathematical reality.
Well, with the same voting pool, I'm not so sure I understand that.
Okay, that's my answer.
Okay.
It is 7 o'clock. We were going to try and close out the questions at 7 o'clock because last week this meeting ran way too long. Everybody was exhausted before we finished it. Does this commission want to continue questioning after 7 o'clock?
Dave, I would like to ask a question.
Let's deal with this real quickly and then you're free to. Vote. Do we want to continue?
Dave, I think we need to let those who have not yet had a chance to ask the questions and then stop it.
I agree. We still have 4 people who have not asked questions.
Right, I appeal, as one who's sitting here, to my colleagues to ask them to try to be succinct if the questions have been asked already in a way, but you kind of want to dig into a particular aspect of it, that's fine, but let's try to move this along. I agree. We do have a lot of other business that we never get to that's important for the next group coming in.
Thank you, Kristen. Who was it speaking on the phone just now?
This is Kurt Anderson.
Kurt, what's your question?
Bill Ward is on up. Excuse me?
I'm sorry, Kurt, what's your question?
My question is following up on the continuity topic that was raised by both the commissioners. They both pointed out that we have a bad reputation amongst the counties of turning over commissioners. I'm not sure how any of the alternate forms would address that aspect.
And I think I've already answered that, but I'll do it again. Basically, if you have an individual that remains in office as county commissioners come and go, basically the policies continue unless a decision is made to change those policies. So, for example, when we funded the jail expansion back in 2017, the prior board had done basically all the groundwork. And so we voted, it was a unanimous vote, we agreed on the expansion. We could have actually stopped that. If we had stopped that at that time, we would have been running out of capacity. Now, theoretically, if you have a manager in place, not only is that more feasible, not only is that more likely to happen that you have continuity, but the fact of the matter is there's a certain knowledge base that's involved as you go forward. Or let's say in the case of a new building. So let's say we allocate the money, we're breaking ground, now you're changing over county commissioners, and there are certain processes that are in place that have to be managed. I think that's the simple answer to the question. You have continuity if you...
Did you have a follow-up?
Okay, thank you. I was focusing on the count of commissioners as being the issue.
I wanted
the manager makes sense.
I wanted to correct one of the things you said was, or maybe add to it. You said that we have a reputation outside of Kootenai County for unstable government. Well, it's true, but we also have one inside Kootenai County among elected officials. That's why, as I pointed out, HR is under the prosecuting attorney, for goodness sakes. It's a well-earned reputation.
Phil, did you have a question? Phil, did you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Phil.
First of all, I have served in government under this
the council manager type form of government, and I have worked privately dealing with government. And 3 votes is far more difficult to get if you want to approve something or deny it than just getting 2 votes. So the number of commissioners can be critical. The distinction between administration and legislation needs to be more clearly drawn than it is now. And the question I have, if we, as a commissioner, you 3 commissioners, decide to appoint an administrator and change nothing else, what kind of authority does that administrator actually have that's any different from what each of you have today?
You want to answer?
No, go ahead.
I'm trying to understand.
I'm trying to understand what,
Yeah.
what the question is,
Phil, you
honestly.
could you restate the question, please?
I don't understand the question.
Yeah. If you add an administrator under your current authority today, he would, or she would stand between the 3 commissioners and the 6 elected line departments.
Okay.
How would that next person have any more authority or provide you any better information than what you could get yourself today?
Okay, so I think I answered that sooner. So when you say the 6 electeds, okay, it could be 4, it could be 6. Remember, that individual now has authority over those people. So if he has authority, or she, that means hire or fire. So if that individual needs certain information from one of his or her subordinates, that individual provides that information. If the individual refuses or doesn't abide by certain what do you want to call it, ordinances or whatever that have been determined, that individual is subject to losing his or her job. I can't do that today. If I go to another elected official today and say, I want this, and they say pound sand, I have no authority over that individual. I can't fire him. Only you can unelect him or her. So I think that's the answer to your question.
Phil, I believe, interrupt, but I believe that the answer to your question is in the statute 31, is it 5103? I'm sorry, 51 or 53 chapter that has the council manager form of government. It specifies the authority of the manager under that form of government, which is more than a simple hire. Is it 53?
It's 5301 through 5312.
Chapter 53 is the answer to your question, Phil.
It depends.
What does it say?
Well, it depends.
I'm sorry, it depends?
It depends whether that form that is a commission manager eliminates elected line officials and puts them subject to the supervision and.
Well, not really. It gives the manager a certain level of authority. If we choose to appoint, to hire the 6 elected officials, then they report to that manager. If we do not, then the other departments still report to that manager. One of the big differences is, in my reading, if I remember this correctly, the manager now takes administrative authority, and the council, the commission, Board of County Commissioners, take legislative authority and judicial authority.
Yes.
But they're no longer responsible for the administrative authority. If I'm wrong about that, that's my memory, but I apologize.
If that's the angle, yeah, you're correct in that regard, yeah.
I mean, one of the assumptions we've been making in some of these questions is that we're going to follow what Chris was suggesting and not elect those officials. That's only one of the options. And the authority of the county manager, commission manager structure, is given in the statute whether we decide not to elect those or to elect them.
That's what I meant.
Okay.
Dave?
Yes, Bruce?
One thing before I finish, I want to reiterate, make this very clear, that whatever this study commission decides, I will support, I will work for it, I will vote for it. So.
Thank you. Bob, you haven't had a chance yet. Do you want to ask anything?
Do I get to make a speech?
Hey, we're already 10 after 7. Go for it.
By the way, would you say the same thing to whatever the commission comes up with, you will support?
Whatever you come up with, I will put on the ballot. Whether I go out and advocate for it, that's another matter.
Well, that brings up my question. You've said 5 or 7 is better than 3. We've gone over that. What would you say the pros or the cons are if this commission were to just make a suggestion to change the number from 3 to 5?
Full-time?
Nothing else.
Full-time?
No, I was thinking part-time actually, but.
Okay, but if you go 5 part-time, who's running the day-to-day operations? You can't do that. If you go part-time, you gotta have a county manager. If you're asking me, would I support going to 5 full-time commissioners? No. And the reason being that we get less efficient and it takes longer to make decisions. I'm glad you raised that question. We have some very dubious stats here in Idaho. Let me add one more that a couple people brought to my attention. We rank last in the nation, depending how you want to look at this, in the number of continuances that local jurisdictions make. By that I mean is decisions that are not made that are deferred. Now, I'm the chairman of the current board. We don't do that. We minimize that. We make our decisions as we go. But as a state, we are ranked last in the nation in that regard. We keep putting off decisions. And somebody else commented last week that, well, that's because of deliberation. No. That's because of inability to make decisions, okay? Because people don't want to face the political consequences. But that's a whole nother matter. I don't agree with 5. 5 part-time? Yes. 5 full-time? No. You're going to slow down the process. It's hard enough with 3, you go to 5, it becomes more difficult. Unless, as I said, unless they're part-time, and then you have a county manager. But if you're gonna go 5 full-time, county commissioners, leave it at 3, keep it as it is.
But if you go 5 part-time, you'd still need the manager.
Oh, yeah, somebody's gotta run day-to-day operations. If we're part-time, it's not gonna happen.
Well, that was my point.
Yeah.
I will forego any questions for right now. It is 7:12. Dave, is there something?
No, I'm fine.
At this point, I would like to ask, do we need to go another round, and can we do so in a reasonable length of time? Last week, we had a long meeting. Everybody was exhausted by the end of it. I don't want to necessarily repeat that, but we need to answer questions that we have. Do we need to go another round?
No.
No.
Anybody else? Is it succinct?
It is. It's a very specific, you mentioned the moth, I think you said moth decision?
Gypsy moths.
Gypsy moth? Oh, thank you, sorry. And that was not a good use of your time. So if that's not a good use of your time, at what level then would you make the decision that these decisions are not worth your time, but these decisions have to be worth your time? So where would that designation lie, and then who makes that designation when these are yours and that is a policy? How does that work to where they're not worth your time, but some are, some aren't? Who would make that decision? Who would make that distinction? They all go to you now and you all have to deal with it now. But you're saying that one was not worth your time. Well, it's obviously important to somebody. So I'm just wondering, in your current structure or possibly some other structure, who makes that designated line of this is not worth your time, this is?
Okay. So that decision, that issue was before our time. That goes back a couple of decades. The point that I was trying to make is you don't need 3 people to convene for a meeting of that type. A single individual can handle that. Now, let me fast forward to a similar situation under this board. Last year, we had a problem with a vicious dog. And it came before us, and the dog had attacked a cat. I think it might have killed, I can't remember all the specifics. It might have killed a cat, I think. And it was a German short-haired pointer, and the gentleman.
A woman.
I'm sorry?
Bit a woman.
It bit a woman, but I think it killed the cat.
And a deer.
Oh, and a deer? Okay,
fawn,
great.
yeah.
So anyway, so that came before us. You don't need 3 people to decide that. One person can do it. We cannot do that today.
So how would that work then? Because I understand that, but then who has the authority to then say, I can make that decision,
County-
you can make somebody else, you can...
In a restructured form, If you go to the optional form of government, the administrator will make that decision. The decision we made, by the way, is I looked at the man and I said, "You want to save your dog?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Fine, we're going to have to take it away from you. Is that okay?" And that's what we did. Somebody adopted the animal. But you didn't need three of us in the room to do that. But under the current structure, we kind of did.
With open meeting?
I'm sorry?
You're saying with open meeting laws and
Yeah,
the
with
way
open meeting laws
quorums
and the fact that
And the
no,
ordinance.
I'm sorry, and the ordinance, and no single one of us is permitted to make that decision. So you would have needed a quorum, at least two of us, and we would have had to agree. Now, let's say two of us were in the meeting, not three, and we disagreed, nothing happens.
So is that more of an administrative issue? You're saying that's administrative versus a policy?
As
Okay.
was the gypsy moth thing too, yeah. Yep.
That was it?
Okay, it is 7:15. We were going to try and resolve the question of the questions for the line officials tonight, since we're going to be starting talking to them next week. We don't have an option of pushing that back. Do we have a completion of the questions now for these two commissioners?
Are we excused?
That's what I'm trying to figure out, Bill. I'm not hearing anything, so it sounds to me. Are we through asking the questions of Commissioners Filios and Brooks?
We're not gonna ask them well, I think they pretty well answered all the ones that were on that Brian was doing.
I think they have, yes.
Yeah, so.
Anything, Kurt, Phil?
Nothing from me, thank you.
Thank you both.
Okay. Gentlemen, I thank you for your help.
Thank
You're very
you, thank
welcome.
you all. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your time, your service. We realize you're not being paid for this.
We do.
We're not?
We get paid for the
Okay.
abuse.
Let's take a 10-minute break. I know we're gonna go past 7:30 with our issues, but let's take a 10-minute break for everyone, and we'll reconvene at 7:25.
Actually, Dave, I have a quick thing. Just to make sure we're all working on the same thing, not to pick on Brian. Okay.
Go ahead and pick on him.
Those two went back and forth with multiple questions, but you wouldn't let me have that, and then you actually let Brian cut into our order without
Actually, I
saying
did
anything.
let you have multiple questions.
Well, you
I
got
did
on my
interrupt you, and I
case.
also interrupted Bruce.
Yes, but you let Brian go when it was supposed to go to Bob. It went from Bruce to Brian to Bruce to Brian to Bruce to Brian.
I have a suggestion.
Feel free, Kristen.
I think we need to come up, well, timer's one suggestion, that was not what I had, am coming up with at this point. I think we need to compose our questions, ask them of the people that are here, follow up if we need some clarification, but they're here to tell us their opinion, how they see the facts, what their experience of the world is. They are not here for us to debate with them, to go back and forth, to define words. I really think we're getting a little bit, we're trying to come up with a conclusion at this point, and right now we should be sitting here absorbing everything. I think it's kind of a disservice to some of us sitting here who just want to hear the facts. It's a little frustrating to have that debate and back and forth with people when I just want to hear what they have to say.
So can I say something real quick? I agree with you.
I absolutely agree.
I'd like to hear the facts too. But when we have a guest here that says, you're not gonna lose your ability to elect officials, and I'm gonna tell the sheriff to do this or else he'll lose his job. You know, first of all, that discussion alone is about people losing their ability to elect their officials. Okay, what that person said was not a fact. It was actually a misinformation to be polite about. So I agree with you. I'd like to hear the facts. And when people start to misspeak about what the facts are, they should be corrected, in my opinion.
I disagree. I think if they misspeak the fact, that probably the next round of guests who come in, or we'll think back to people who've been here already, we are intelligent individuals. We can figure this out. We can't, when we're in our discussion phase, you can say, you know, so-and-so, when he or she came in, I feel that they weren't representing the facts, and here's why I don't like the idea they proposed. That's when we do it. We don't do it at this point. That's just my opinion. I think we're wasting our time and we're wasting their time, and we're not moving this process forward.
Kristen, I totally agree with you, and I don't know what the solution is to that except to ask everyone's cooperation to be more succinct. I can't say that word too well, but a timekeeper situation might help that. We are all allotted a certain amount of time to ask a question, and it would move it through faster.
One thing I would think, Bruce, and that is, we're not here to debate with them, we're here to ask them for their opinions. And if we disagree with their opinions, we bring up our opinions during deliberation, not during information. They're here to testify. When you go to court, the lawyers here can take care of this. When you go to court, you're not arguing with your testimony, you're taking testimony from the witness. We're not here to argue with them. That comes in during our deliberation. During a deliberation, you're free to say, and by the way, they were full of it. They didn't know what they were talking about. Here's the facts. That's fine. But we're wasting their time and ours right now when we're supposed to be taking testimony if we're arguing with them, if we're deliberating at this moment.
Well, I understand, and I do appreciate what you're saying. These two gentlemen here are largely responsible for why we are here.
Yes.
And I think that it's only fair that they should, state the facts, and that they should provide us as much of their opinion as they want. But when he goes, it doesn't matter what I believe, I don't find that to be a credible statement when we invited them here to hear exactly what they believe.
I do agree with him. It doesn't matter what he believes, because it's up to the 9 of us to make a recommendation. What he said tonight may or may not impact the recommendation we make. What is said last week, the week before, any of these evenings, taken individually, may or may not impact what we decide. We'll take the testimony, whatever we believe that testimony to be, the value of that testimony to be, and we can move forward with that. But Chris is not going to make the decision. Bill is not going to make the decision. 9 of us, or at least a majority of the 9 of us, will make a decision.
And I want to also ask, it is feeling that some people in our commission are confrontational, not questions, but confronting. And to your point, they're here, they're stating how they view things, whether or not it is factual. It's getting a little bit too confrontational instead of just information gathering. And that doesn't feel good. I don't think that's why we're here. We're not here to confront them. We're here to find out what their opinions and experiences are and their perception of the facts. And if we disagree with their perception of the facts, that's, again, I agree, that's for us to deliberate. But I would like us to stop some of the confrontational aspect and the back and forth.
Let me ask you a question. Is any of this directed at me, other than interrupting you?
Well, it wasn't interrupting me. It was interrupting the flow that we had all agreed to, that's what we would abide by. And so, because last week Kurt tried to interject and Dave said, no, it's not your turn. But tonight, there was no interjection. You were allowed to go, even though you were technically out of turn. So that's why I'm just asking, are we not allowing this dynamic anymore, or are we going to still go person to person? Because it was both, but...
I thought it was my turn, and then I forgot about the 2 on the phone, so...
Well, no, you went directly right after Bruce.
So I apologize, but I
Yeah.
thought...
No, that's why I said I'm not picking on you. I'm just asking.
Well, I'm defensive and paranoid by nature. But I just was like, is any of this directed at me?
No, it was just because of the situation, and because he did. He stopped Kurt from speaking, that was what we had agreed to do. But tonight, you were allowed without any stoppage. So that's why I was asking, why are we going back to this type of dynamic, or are we going to still stick with the person to person?
No, I was trying to keep people going in order.
Hand
you the talking stick.
I was trying to keep us going in order. I believe that Brian was clarifying something that Bruce had asked and was being answered by the commissioners. He was succinct in his question, and we were not going to get another round, in my opinion, although I hadn't asked for a vote yet.
It's kind of
I
slippery.
didn't think it very likely that we would go around again.
Okay.
So it may be that I should not have allowed the question from Brian.
You know me, transparency. I want to just make sure what we're doing, how we're doing it, and that it's understood and that we all work for the same,
I would like us to go around
process.
with succinct questions, one question, one follow-up, move on to the next. If we had done that tonight, we would have been a lot further along at 7:30, or at 7 o'clock than we were. So it is
We're all
7:40, and are we now
Let's
ready
go.
to start discussing the questions for the line officials?
Yes.
Sherry, duly noted. Duly noted. So I love all of you and respect you all.
Exactly. No, I
do. And,
Are these the only ones we
I
have?
appreciate you bringing that up.
Where'd you get those?
This was sent, this is by Brian. Do we have any other? This has yours on it, it has Kristen's on it. Is this the only?
When was that given out?
Oh,
That's
Brian was making the list, as I remember, right,
yeah,
Brian?
it was sent out. I'd have to check my phone.
I lost my place. So the questions, and I did consolidate what was sent to me from, I believe, 2 study commissioners and put it in a document, sent it back out to Nancy. My understanding was she distributed it before the last meeting. So that's my understanding of where things are at.
Okay.
It's June 30th.
June 30th?
It's the
Okay.
dated June 30th.
Can I see that?
Of course.
And I guess, Brian, my comment my questions were things that I was kind of brainstorming with myself and trying to come up with something that was a little bit different than just the usual, what is your function? What is your, what is your relationship? I didn't even address what I thought the nitty gritty questions would be. I think we need some, because I thought mine were kind of going to be add-ins to what other people said. I was trying to be creative. So I don't know that we're in a place to talk about questions, because if you're just looking at mine and Jones, I'm not sure.
Well, it's yours,
I thought I
Jones,
had some in there.
and
Oh, did you?
Brian's, and from all the earlier commissions. It's a compilation of a
Okay.
bunch of different ones.
Yeah, the ones from the 2006 Study Commission, I do see that, and
You have the
then
list
the
in front of
refined.
you?
So that-
Okay.
12.
Do you have the list in front of you?
I will.
Yeah, you should have a memorandum dated June 30th.
Was this it?
Brian sent it to us on
Yeah, it was the June
Right.
30 memo.
No, I,
memorandum that you sent Brian at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, those are my normal working hours.
I do have that one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Same thing.
so that's what Nancy put together and sent out to us on that June 30th.
Right,
memo.
I guess I just expected to see something that was, that would take questions that might be redundant and kick them out and just kind of come up.
Out of respect for you, I actually put everybody who sent me questions.
You're so sweet.
No, I mean, I truly mean that. Out of
Yeah, no,
respect
no,
for you,
I
wouldn't
know.
alter the question. I just
I
dumped them in.
need to find mine
The
here.
purpose was that they were all there from every individual, including myself, that I received them from. Put them together, and then we, for purposes of let's have a discussion about it. And if we're gonna, and if you recall the last meeting, I said, I'll bring my laptop, and if we want to collapse
Okay.
and edit, we could do that real time.
Well, I was just glancing at my questions, and I think they're brilliant, so they stand.
If everyone is amenable, why don't we have Brian give us the questions one by one, discuss each question briefly, and decide whether or not that question is one that we want to put to all of the commission,
couldn't
all
get
of
down
the
here.
row officials, or to some row officials and not others. Does that sound reasonable?
Thanks.
I know it's getting late. Sorry.
Yeah, I kind of phased out there for a second.
I mean, another approach would be, David, is we could skim it, read it again, and if anybody has, we can go and say, anybody have a problem with section 1, anybody have a problem? I mean, people may just say, I accept it as needed.
That's kind of what I was hoping for with a succinct discussion, yes.
But I don't think it needs to explain it to us.
I wasn't asking for explanation, just read the question.
So I have a question, if I could. Okay, so has the commission decided that we're going to have formalized questions or not?
We have been asked to provide questions to the row officials before they arrive, so
Okay.
they can prepare their presentations.
Got it. So these are not necessarily for us to ask, it's just for them to prepare.
This would be a
Okay.
list
Okay.
of questions presented to them
Got
to
it.
give them the
Thank you for that
directions
clarification.
for their presentation.
Okay, now I
And the other
understand.
thing that we talked about last week was, when we send them the questions, we'll also remind them that if they want to respond in writing for the official record,
Okay,
that is acceptable too. So we wanted to get that in there. So they may respond, still come, but they may respond to some of these in writing,
Okay.
which would be helpful.
thanks. Thanks for that
So that was
clarification.
the earlier study commission, those were the questions they asked.
Okay, which way do we want to do it? Do we want Brian to read the questions and go with them, or do we want to
I like
simply
Dave's
just?
An overview, which was, what I did was I went back, if you recall, the prior study commission, and I said 2006 in here, but I think it was 96.
Yeah.
Had a series of questions that they asked every interview official. And I copied those in here in the first Roman numeral 1. I just copied them in verbatim, like, look, this is what they asked. And then I think section 2 here, Roman numeral number 2, is a potential refinement of those questions. And I believe that's my attempt to refine them. And in my own way, I kind of built on them and got a little more nitty gritty in the details on them. And I'll go over them in a minute if you desire, but I'm just describing the structure of what I did here.
Really, really.
And then section 3, Roman numeral 3 is questions proposed for row officials by Commissioner Wing, Kristen. And then 4 were commissioner questions from Genter, right? Genter, thank you.
Thank you.
And so that's the structure, not trying to preclude anybody. I'm not going to speak to my own questions because I'm enamored of my own work, but I'll go through them if you want, if that's desired. You know, I could just read off, in your opinion, what are the strengths and weaknesses of Kootenai County current government structure as it relates to your office? If possible, please explain by reference to specific examples of such strengths and weaknesses.
Just real quickly, Brian, if your section 2 was refinements of section 1, if you have the same question in section 1 and 2, let's just jump to the refined version.
I'm skipping over section 1.
Okay.
That's just by reference of history. Here's what that other commission asked.
Okay.
And my section 2 is me saying, here's some refinements to that.
Okay.
That I would think, from my perspective, could do better on that.
Sounds good.
So it's same questions, but better. So under part 2A, that's the first one I read. Then there's B, next question, which is, if not addressed by your preceding response, why should your office remain an elected position as opposed to an appointed one within the Kootenai County government? Next question, C, assuming Kootenai County voters approved a ballot measure to change your office from an elected position to an appointed one, what do you believe would be the immediate and long-term impacts of such change? In addition, what effect do you believe this change would have on activities administered by your office in which the Board of County Commissioners is involved? So, example, like developing budgets, human resource matters, risk management, contract solicitation and administration. The cost and efficiency of your office in delivering services to the public, the accountability of your office to the public. And then my final question is, in your opinion, what are the impacts of growth in Kootenai County on the administration of the services provided by your office? In view of such growth, do you believe that the current structure of Kootenai County government is adequate to your office's delivery of services to the public? In your opinion, what changes, if any, should be made in the structure of Kootenai County government to facilitate your office delivering services to the public?
Okay. Any discussion on these 4 questions? Any issues, any desire to change any wording? Kurt?
I guess, I'm slightly concerned that we're asking them to opine on the overall government aspect as opposed to the earlier study commission that focused it specifically on their position.
Any discussion of that?
I actually would be interested in hearing them opine. They work within that bureaucracy, that structure. I'm sure they have opinions, and sometimes I've learned through my years in various positions that the line staff or people below at least the CEO or board of director level often have a lot of really good ideas about how to make things better.
Any other discussion on this issue?
Yeah, I guess my only concern was if the sheriff started to argue that the prosecutor ought to be hired, for example.
Let him.
Yeah.
It's his opinion.
Fair enough.
You have your opinion, I have mine, he has his.
I think I did try and keep it in the confines of the person who is answering the question to the confines of their job. Don't opine about somebody else's job. I want to hear about you as a line official and what you think from your perspective, where you sit in your job. So I might have, I have to look back and skim, maybe I broadened it a bit, but I thought as I was crafting these, I was trying to keep it particular to the line official and say, in your opinion, from your view of the county government, what do you see? Right? And what's your opinion?
And that may be what Kurt's looking at, that it's from your opinion, what's your view of the county government versus what's your opinion of your silo?
Oh, yeah.
Is that, I don't want to speak for you, Kurt, but is that what's going on?
Yeah, that was basically the point that caught my
Yeah, okay, so I get your point now. But it is important, I think, because these are each line official elected has a particularized function under Idaho code, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not this function that they go along and just do without any recognition of all the other line officials around them. They have to interact in some ways. They do have that function, but they interact. So their perspective on how that occurs, I think, is important.
I agree. Phil, are you still awake? I know it's getting late there.
North Carolina.
Not hearing an answer. Phil, are you still there?
I'm here, I'm awake, but it's 11:15 here, so, let's move it along. I agree with what Christian was saying, to be honest.
What'd he say?
He agrees with what you were saying, Kristen.
Well, thank you, Phil.
Okay, is that enough discussion of these four? Are we ready to submit these four to the line officials as the base of our questioning? Looks to me like we've got agreement. Let's show of hands. I'm sorry?
Are we skipping consideration of Kristen and Joe's question?
For the moment, we're trying to deal with the first four questions, then we'll deal with Kristen's, and then we'll deal with Jones. I thought it was too much to try to deal with all of them at once.
Well, do any of them have to be collapsed, like from Kristen and Jones, like should they be
They might
collapsed?
have to be, and we can talk about that, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're saying like first let's figure out first
Just
four.
deal with
then
the
go to
first
the
four
next
for
couple,
now.
and then figure out whether we could consolidate them and streamline them in some way.
Right.
Okay.
Call for a vote? These four okay?
Yeah.
Dave, abstain, okay? Okay, let's go with these four.
Pending consideration of the others, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, let's go to the next set of questions.
So
I
these are,
believe Kristen's were next in your list.
yep. Chris, you don't mind me reading them, do you?
No.
Okay. Who has the big picture of where the county should be going and what the priorities are? How is information exchanged? What is the mechanism for the flow of ideas and plans from the row officials to the commissioners and vice versa? Is there true collaboration / consultation? Or does each unit, by that I mean the commissioners and each of the row officials, pursue its own agenda / have its own plans and priorities in isolation? That's question one from Kristen. Her second question is, do you feel that you are the best suited for the position you hold?
Qualified.
Best qualified, I'm sorry, for the position you hold. The pool of candidates is limited to the number of eligible persons in the county. What do you do to educate yourself / expand your skill set so that you can do the best possible job for the citizens of the county? Third question from Kristen is, who does the work? What is the span of control and what are the specific responsibilities of the row official as compared to his, her deputy? Who manages / supervises the line staff? Her next question, Kristen's next question is, how do you hire your deputy? Do you do a search outside of the county? Do you look for specific skills that complement yours or just someone to execute your requests? And Kristen's last question is, what do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of the current structure of county government as it pertains to your current position? What do you feel it would, why do you feel it would be a mistake to change your position from elected to someone hired by the commissioners and administrative manager? I'm looking for an explanation other than that the people want to directly elect their representatives. As an insider doing the job, what are the operational pitfalls to having hired row officials? So that's Kristen's questions.
Okay. I would make a comment on, I believe it was the third one, where you're asking, I believe it was qualifications of the row official. Since these are going to the row officials, I think it would be better to phrase it something along the lines of your position. Because these questions are going to the row officials. So to say, what's the qualification of the row official?
Oh, you mean of your
Right.
position?
And maybe I need clarification.
Like a hiring interview for me.
Right. I'm,
We're not hiring these guys, we're not.
well, we're trying,
Kurt, we're looking for their opinions on the situation.
And asking them if they feel like they're the best qualified candidate for their position is pertinent now.
Why is it not?
sure it is.
Well, if I could,
It seems like an attack. I mean, we've been talking about not being nice to the people we're interviewing, and we're gonna drag them in here and ask them if they're best qualified?
Okay, how about just dropping that and just saying, what do you do to educate yourself and expand your skill set? Because no one, we've heard from everyone so far, Kurt, that they come into the job and it's like, whoa, I did not know what this job was really going to be. And they work really, really hard to educate themselves. Sometimes they prepare before they take the job, sometimes they're preparing when they're in the job. So I think it would be interesting to understand what their process is, because we may find by that people who run for elected office take it so seriously, feel it's a service that they're giving back, that they actually make themselves the person that we need them to be. I want to hear somebody say that.
And actually, a question about their qualifications, Kurt, a question about their qualifications is not necessarily an attack, because if someone is hired who is, or is elected, who is qualified, they can hire someone who is an apprentice. If someone is elected who is not qualified, they need to do a search for a qualified support. It doesn't mean we can't elect someone who's not qualified. It just means they need to hire someone who knows what they're doing, which goes back to Matheson's time here. He said that he did a search looking for someone who was qualified in his office, and he ended up hiring someone, I can't remember, was it Seattle or something like that, but he did a long search looking for someone who's qualified, and he found someone who had worked in several different forms of government, and he was satisfied that that person was qualified as his chief deputy.
It may be good to do what Kristen said is, I think the real issue we're trying to understand is, are they trying to get knowledge of the job? You know, they're gonna say they're the most qualified person because the voters voted them in. So therefore, they are qualified. But I think what you were trying to get to is continuous learning.
Right.
And trying to keep up with the changes in the laws and all that. So maybe taking out that first part and just go to, what do you do to educate, expand your skill set is maybe the way to go, and it's less confrontational.
That's absolutely fine. And remember, the charge to us was to put these questions out, not to, you know, and to get feedback. I appreciate, especially since I'm one who doesn't want to be confrontational, I appreciate someone pointing out to me that that was. But that's what I expect from this team. I expect that we're going to work on the question until it becomes the right question and that we're all comfortable with it.
Okay. I believe I'm hearing a consensus building that we take out the question of qualification and leave in the question of continuing education.
Sure.
Is that correct?
Right.
Can I ask, though, does continuing education have anything to do with whether or not it's an elected or appointed position?
No,
No.
I wouldn't think so.
No.
Okay, then is it germane to our consideration?
I'm sorry, repeat, Quirt?
Is it germane to our consideration if it has nothing to do with whether it's elected or appointed?
I think it gives, and somebody else can speak if you want, I think it gives us a view of what this individual's idea of his job is, his or her.
If I could say something, David?
Sure. Go ahead, Phil.
How someone gets in the job, when it relates to what they need to keep that job, is less important. Knowing that once they get there, they are trying to maintain the highest caliber of performance as possible, whether it's of education or hiring the proper people.
Comments? You probably can't see, Phil, you're getting some nodding heads, but nobody's speaking. Okay.
The ayes have it.
That's right.
The nods.
What was the gist of what he said?
Yeah.
Phil, can you repeat?
The ayes have it.
Repeat your position?
All I said is that the ayes have it.
No, your actual position before that.
Oh, how someone gets in the office is less important at this point than what they do to maintain that office and provide the best performance possible.
Could you hear him?
I think so.
Okay.
And that's whether through education or acquisition of support personnel for that, you know, so it would be interesting to hear if they feel that it's more their duty to educate themselves or it's more their duty to find the right people to surround them with. It's an interesting way.
It is.
Just to look at how they do their job.
And at this point, we're not asking them to decide whether they should be elected or they should be appointed, hired. We're asking them, how do you work? How are you giving the county the best job that you can? Any further comments? So, with the one modification to take out the question of qualification, yes, Kristen?
I think E, though, probably has already been asked. So I think that we can rework E, because that's when I say, what do you think are the strengths and weaknesses of the current structure of county government as it pertains to your current position? Why do you feel it would be a mistake to change your position from elected to someone hired by the commissioners and administrative manager? I'm looking for an explanation. Anyway, what are the operational pitfalls to having a hired row official? I'd like to hear their opinion on that, because and I like the word pitfalls, because there are things that it's not just I like my job or I don't like my job, or I work with people well or I don't work with my people well. What are the operational pitfalls that we may not be aware of from their perspective?
Sure. What are they going to trip over the first day they're on
Yeah,
office?
yeah.
The only thing on that one, I think the question is very leading. Why do you feel?
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying, what are they, just take it out to, again, I'm thinking of my question and I'm working it and it's gonna come to a
I
group
would
here.
agree. Yeah,
I
just go down the
totally agree,
bottom.
you just take all that other stuff out like you did with my other one and say, as an insider
Yes.
doing the job, what are the operational pitfalls to having hired row officials rather than
Very
elected?
succinct question, short and
Do
sweet.
we want to focus this to say, as the insider doing the job, what would be the operational pitfalls to have somebody hired to do your position?
That's,
I think the first part was a given, but we can specify that, sure. Anybody else?
Well, I'd almost have it be the option, as an insider doing the job, what are the operational pitfalls to having hired row officials? It's still a leading question.
It is, but are you going to ask them what are the operational pitfalls to electing someone?
I would say, what are operational pitfalls?
I would
Just
put them both.
both, absolutely. They're gonna have, I'm sure, an opinion one way or the other, but yeah, why not?
Discussion? Crickets?
so you're saying, what are the operational pitfalls to having hired versus elected row officials?
That's what we're supposed to be doing, is the contracts.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I'm sorry.
I couldn't hear you, Kurt.
I would say we need to focus it on their position, not to ask them to opine about all the rest of the row officials.
That's actually true too, because then you're gonna start asking for opinions that they have based on others that they are not privy possibly to how that structure works, so.
I thought that was in the question, isn't it in the question, it's your position?
Yeah, as an insider doing the job, what are the operations?
For their position, they're not for the other, all of them, but for their specific row.
Okay, as an
elected
outsider
position.
doing the job, what are the operational pitfalls to being a hired row official versus an elected row official?
I think what they're suggesting is what are the operational pitfalls to being in your position?
Yes.
Whether you're hired or whether you're elected.
Oh, well, that isn't what I was asking. That's.
No, I think, Kristen, you're asking what pitfalls would be specific to having been hired into your position?
Right.
And what are the pitfalls that you ran into being elected? Because they've already done that, right?
Right.
That's a good distinction.
Discussion? Once again, crickets?
I have no idea how this is going to actually end up on a piece of paper, but it'll be.
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out right now.
Could someone restate what's being presented?
So Kirk, did I say it in a way the last time I said it, in a way that you would agree? As an insider doing the job, what are the operational pitfalls to being a hired row official versus, or being an elected row official versus being a hired row official?
Yeah, but I would not use the general term row official. I think.
Well, right. I'm trying to talk in a generic sense now. We can make it specific to the, being the coroner. I mean.
Well, I would just say to being hired into your position versus elected in your position.
Oh, I see. That's fine, because it's going to a row official. I was trying to make clear to all of you colleagues that I was addressing this to a row official.
And we can either use row official,
Specifically to the officials.
we could use row official and substitute each official's title, or we can go a generic to your position.
I would say to your position. It's gonna go to that individual.
Generic, because the previous 4 questions were generic.
That's
Consistent.
fine. Again, I'm putting my question out to, and keeping in mind who I think this is going to. I'm not stuck on using the word row official in there. That's the term I use because I'd never heard that before. And so row official now means to me those 6 elected positions. And that's all I was trying to convey to the group, is that the question was directed to them.
So,
Because it wouldn't be directed to their deputies, because the deputies are hired.
right. Are we set on the wording here?
Let's hear it.
Brian, have you got it?
If I may, again, I had, what are the operational pitfalls of being a hired official versus elected in your position?
I think that
Hired
pretty
versus
much-
elected into your position.
I think that covers it. Anybody?
And but it's important, I still like saying as an insider doing the job. I want them to know that we're acknowledging that they're doing the job and we would like their opinion, because they have knowledge that we don't have.
Any dispute?
So as an insider doing your job, what are the operational pitfalls of being hired versus elected into your position?
We're asking for their opinion, so we don't need to argue whether it's factual or not. It's an opinion. Okay. We have the 3rd and 5th questions modified. Any further discussion of this?
And I'm just saying, I'm very wordy. You can see this with my questions. If anyone wants to make it more succinct,
A, I think, has a bunch, there's
Yeah,
what,
yeah,
3
yeah.
different question marks in there. So,
But I think those 3 questions are important.
they all work together,
They
I
work
thought.
they do, but I think somebody receiving this would probably like to have them broken up so they can answer each one then clearly. They can obviously bring it together, said, or as previously stated, but looking at that to answer that, that's an involved answer. Maybe breaking it up a little bit, make it a little more succinct, they then would be able to provide a more succinct answer.
Are you perceiving this as being a Q&A situation, or is this a framework for them to structure their discussion?
Yeah, I guess my feeling is that this goes to people so they get an idea of the sorts of questions that we might be asking. They might sit in front of us and say, and start talking about part of that, and we never even have to ask a question, number one. And I just forgot number 2. I'm tired.
Well, I think that was going to be my question. I just want to confirm, I thought this was here's some things for you to think about when you come here.
Right,
These are the type
right.
of things we're
These
going
are
to
the
be
type of
asked.
things we're
But we're not
interested in.
necessarily going to go and say, okay, what do you feel are your strengths and weaknesses?
Right.
I mean, it's just types of things for them to be prepared for. So if it is a little wordy, it's okay, because it's the intent of it on that. But, I would make it clear in the email to them that these are just a roadmap to some of the things that we're interested in.
But again, if they're going to submit a written statement answering these questions or addressing these questions, then we should make it straightforward for them to do so.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, if you do ask them to make a written response, whoever is putting that out there to them should clarify and kind of paraphrase how they should approach this.
Alternative.
I mean, unless it's going to be one of us, I don't think we can assign that to Nancy effectively.
Why
Well,
not?
we can structure the email for Nancy. She'll do that.
Okay.
She'll send out whatever structured email we need to.
They also are not obligated to answer all of these.
Sure.
They can pick and choose, if they come in, and actually, I think any of the people who have come to this, up to this point. If we ask a question, they could say, I don't really have a comment on that, and we can move on. So they need to understand that too. That this is a roadmap. We want to give them some idea of how we're thinking and what we're thinking about. And these specific questions may not necessarily come up.
And quite
Because,
frankly, we can't force an answer to any particular
Right.
question.
Right.
If we ask a question and they want to talk about the price of hay because of the drought, there's not much we can do about it.
right. Should we go
Further
to,
discussion?
should we go to Jones?
I'm withdrawing mine because they're already asking. I
Yeah.
also felt that I was focused more on the commissioners, the BOCC, and not so much on the rural officials with those questions.
Yeah.
So I'm withdrawing those questions.
Okay. So we are coming to a conclusion here. It's only 8:15. Where do we stand on these questions, the 5 questions currently here? We've modified question 3 and question 5. We have discussed the fact that question 1 is wordy?
I don't see one as wordy. I think it ties together.
I did have a question for Kristen, though, on the second part of the first question. How is information exchanged? Are you asking if they use a telephone or a video conference? Or
I would hope you really didn't, that's not a serious question. What I want to know, since, and I don't mean to be insulting with that, but what we've heard from everybody is that there is a lot of dysfunction, and that people operate in silos. So I want to get some idea how information is exchanged. And I'm not talking about, do you talk on the phone? I'm talking about, we have informal meetings, we have formal meetings, we get little subcommittees together, like if the county wants to change the telecommunication system, a lot of us are asked if we want to send somebody from each group to have input. I mean, I don't know if they do that or not. If they do, then a lot of what we're concerned about may just go away, because the people who are doing the job, like the Nancys of the world, might be making this all work beautifully underneath the surface. So I really kind of want to see. Now, the row officials may have one opinion, but I think some of these questions I would like to see asked of the staff too, when they come in, because this may end up being a non-issue.
I think what Kristen's saying right now, and I don't want to speak for you, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. She's asking, are you executives getting together and talking and making these decisions, or your subordinates doing fail bridges to avoid you guys facing one another and going in face to face?
Well, I hadn't actually thought of it that way, but I would like to hear that people do get together. The commissioners can't meet because it's a quorum, but I hope that doesn't mean these other people don't get together. Yes, they each have specific functions, but I would think that they would care about how they're operating compared to everybody else and want to learn from each other. Hey, Joe, you've been a whatever for, you've been elected 8 years now, and I'm new here. How did you do X, Y, Z? I mean, I'm used to that sort of cooperation and collaboration, and I would feel really good if that's what we hear from these people, because what it would say is that some of our concerns about the dysfunction that appears to be there may not be there, because people are working it out.
Also, their opinion might not relate, their perception might be very different from another row official's perception. So they may think that they're really talking to people, and then the other one will say that nobody talks to me, type of thing. So it would be actually helpful to see if their comments all kind of are similar. If they think that they're working in a collaborative fashion, it would be really nice to hear them all say that, not just one.
It may be maybe another way of looking at question.
Is your mic open?
Yeah,
there?
it's on. Question A is, if we took out the information exchanged, because the next sentence is collaboration and and
that's-
collaboration is information exchanges and
That's
different
fine.
types. So if you take out the question about information and just go directly is, what is the big picture? And then how do you collaborate with your fellow I think that kind of gets to the meat of what you want.
That's fine too. Like I said, if we can shrink this a little
Yeah.
bit, not have it look like such a daunting question, I'm happy for that. I just tend to be wordy.
I like that rephrasing.
So,
So we're gonna remove the.
How is information exchanged? What is the mechanism?
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. Just,
Second sentence.
and
Remove the second
strike
sentence.
the second sentence.
Yes.
Third
now,
sentence.
I do care though, I do want to capture, again, we don't like the term row officials, but for my purposes, I do like capturing the idea of the row officials communicating with the commissioners. So the second part, is there true collaboration or does each unit pursue its own agenda? I just want to make sure that we get at that idea, because I just recall last week with Commissioner Duncan, she said, I have a good relationship with 4 of the 6. And I was actually surprised to hear that. And it's like, I'm sitting here going, ooh, which 4 of the 6? What 2? You know, but she was very open and honest about that. I have a good relationship with 4 of the 6. 1 she's working on, and the other, there's no hope. That's basically what she said. And so I kind of want to hear from their point of view what they feel their relationship should be with the commissioners. Yes, the commissioners don't direct them. They don't supervise them. But I would hope that everybody's coming into this job to serve the county and the voters. So I want to hear how they do that in collaboration, if they do.
Okay.
So that's what I'm trying to get at. And if anyone wants to help me word it better, fine, but
So could you add, is there true collaboration consultation between the commissioners and the line officials, row officials? Just putting that in there, or
Yeah.
does each unit? So then you're trying to make that connection of who you're actually trying to get the communication
I have no problem with
to.
that if
I would
the group
suggest,
likes
since
that
we're
better.
giving this to an individual row official, is a true collaboration between your position and the commissioners.
Yeah,
Perfect.
yeah,
Not between the commissioners and the row officials, because we're not really asking them to opine on the other
Right.
row officials.
Correct.
and thank you for that point too. We're not, again,
No.
these are questions I put out and we have to now make sure that they're appropriate
So
for
if you
each
say
individual.
between you, is there true collaboration?
It's getting late,
Joan,
yes.
it is, I know. Between you and, because it's going to one person and they're
Yeah.
answering for themselves, so you
I would
and the
suggest
commissioners.
your position or your office.
That's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Did
Okay,
you get that, Brian?
I'm done.
Yeah,
Whoops.
actually,
Leaded
I'm
myself.
typing it into a text to myself. I'm not just texting somebody.
We trusted you.
I've had pen malfunction. I forgot my laptop, and it was updating, so I couldn't take it with me. So here I am.
Okay,
Texting
well, we're
to
glad you're here.
myself. Is there true collaboration between
Dave has it too.
the commissioners and
Your office.
your office?
Yes.
Your office.
I'm kind of curious how they interact with each other, though. The row
Yeah.
officials, do they have much interaction with each
That's-
other?
Something I was going to bring up on this, which is maybe a more open-ended question, which is, how is it that your office and the commissioners collaborate? Like, explain it. What do you? How is it that you collaborate and coordinate with one another between the commissioners and your office? And then that's open-ended, and then they could say, we don't, or
Yeah, no,
yes, we do.
that's a very positive,
I could.
that's a positive way of saying it.
Yeah, I like
I
that.
More
like that.
open-ended.
That's,
Yes.
that's fine.
I
Yeah.
thought I heard Sherry ask where also is the collaboration between you and the other officials, the
Yeah,
other elected
right,
officials.
right.
I would like to add that.
Yeah, just add that to
So
it.
between your office, the commissioners,
Kind
and
of
the
a
other
team.
elected
Are you
officials,
guys a
I think.
team or not, you know?
Yeah.
So it's beyond just you and the commissioner, your office and the
Your
commissioners?
office, the commissioners,
Your
and the other elected
officers and other
officials.
And the other elected officials.
elected officials, yeah. Basically, how is it that your office coordinates and collaborates with other elected officials?
With the rest of county government?
Sure.
Well, elected officials in county government, such as the board and the other
Well,
elected.
they're gonna, yeah, they're
Sure,
gonna
you don't
know.
want the
Yeah.
sheriff and the prosecuting attorney disagreeing about what they should be investigating and prosecuting.
So how is it that you collaborate and coordinate with the
Yeah.
other elected officials in the county?
Perfect.
Perfect.
You might put a commissioners and.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the commissioners are elected too, so.
They are, but I
Well,
would rather they don't think that the question is only about the 6 elected officials.
Yeah, I think it's really important, because each of the commissioners has made it clear to us that there are issues in their relationship with some of the other elected officials. So since they've all kind of implied that, I think I want the commissioners in there too, for sure.
Yep. I think I have it. How is it that your office collaborates and coordinates with the Board of County Commissioners and other elected officials in the county?
Sounds like what we were asking. Anybody else?
Sounds fine, sorry, we're beating this to death.
No disagreement? Okay, ready, Brian?
Yeah.
We have 5 questions. We have now modified 3 of the 5. Are we prepared to vote on putting these 5 on the questionnaire? Crickets?
I'm ready.
Are we in favor of putting them on there? We have a majority.
Yeah, I think.
Guess what? I think we finished this
Oh.
question.
Don't we have to do this?
No, that wasn't on today's.
Oh,
We
good.
do have to do one aspect of it, though.
Okay.
And that is, we have to deal with next week's.
Okay.
Next week, we have Dr. Keene willing to come speak with us. Nancy, am I right about this? Dr. Keene, yes, and were you suggesting Evan Koch as well?
Here so I can be heard. Dr. Keene is a possibility. He wanted to hear what the questions would be to see if he had enough time to prepare. Evan Koch from the Democratic Central Committee is available. If Coroner Keene is not available, would you like me, is it too soon to talk to maybe one of the chief deputies or someone else on your list, which there was a new list given out tonight. We had a few other additions from emails I had missed. So if you want to identify a few backup people in case Dr. Keene is not available, Sheriff Norris has indicated August 11th would be good for him. So right now what we're looking at, the dates are in your handout, would be next week potentially Dr. Keene and Evan Koch. The following week, Jim Brannon, Finance Director Dina Darrow, and Chief Deputy Clerk Jennifer Locke. The week after that would be Assessor Kovacs and Prosecutor McHugh, and then after that, the sheriff. We're getting a good plan out as soon as we get through next week.
Okay.
I guess I would, so Mr. Koch is basically the equivalent of Brent Regan for the Democrats. Doesn't that seem a little odd to have him with, I realize Mr. Regan came with Commissioner Duncan, but they're.
Well, no,
he
actually,
came with Steve
he came
Matheson.
with Steve.
Oh, he
Matheson.
came with Steve Matheson.
Yeah, the treasurer.
Okay, and so we didn't have any trouble with it.
Nope.
That was the one I missed, and I couldn't even hear half of it, so.
We had a problem that night with getting anybody in.
Yeah, okay, okay,
We originally intended to bring Commissioner Duncan in. She couldn't come in that night.
sure.
So we ended up with Brent Regan and Steve Matheson.
Yeah, it was kind of an odd combo, but we'll have another odd combo.
But then actually, the nice thing is, Evan Koch is a nurse anesthetist, and if the coroner comes in, we have a doctor and a nurse anesthetist together, so.
You know, I think that's wonderful, so if we're all gonna have, any of us are gonna have our heart attacks, next week is the day to do it.
So it's
Let's hope
actually
not.
a nice combo, actually.
Yeah, it is, well, thank
So
you.
we will all
That
be
is
asked to
cool.
submit
We'll,
DNRs
so
before they
we'll
come.
be submitting different, we'll be asking them medical questions and getting advice. Okay, I'm looking forward to this.
Or on the other hand, everyone could understand why we all fall asleep.
Yeah, right.
So if Dr.
Good point.
Keene is not available, how would you like me to proceed for next week?
Do we have any of the row officials who are available next week other than Dr. Keene?
I do not believe so.
Okay. We were talking about, I'm trying to remember the name. It was an ex-chief deputy for, was it the treasurer's office?
Probably Lori Thomas, who was here for about 15 years and recently retired.
I think somebody that is no longer chief deputy might be more willing to speak honestly with us about the conditions in the office. Do I hear any discussion over whether or not we can invite an ex-chief deputy in if we cannot get the coroner?
I think it would be better to have the current chief deputies speak first. And then if there's an opportunity for an ex, but I think we want to know what's going on right now. And while that information could be valuable from 15 years, I'm not discounting that.
She just resigned. She has a
Okay.
15-year history, but she just resigned.
When did she just resign?
A year ago, 6 months ago?
Earlier this year, since the beginning
Okay,
of the year.
okay, so it's still relatively current. We're not talking years and years out, okay.
You've also mentioned the HR director. That would be another one that I could potentially.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from the HR director.
And what about Mike McDowell? Would you guys have any objection? He was a former county assessor. I actually remember his name, so he's not that, Mike McDowell.
Yeah, he was assessor recently.
Yeah, so he's got a lot of history too. And I kind of like some history, so even though he's former, he's not that far former, and lots of history, lots of experience. So maybe he would be somebody to consider if we're having a hard time getting somebody else in, just to add him to the list.
The other thing too is, we have other agenda items too.
Yes.
And it may be okay to have one person next week and focus on the potential guests for interviews as one. I would like to, several of us have mentioned having a discussion on public comments and when public comment should be allowed so we can get something on the schedule and communicate to the people what the plan is. So maybe a discussion on communications or public meetings, or there's several steps along the process for the public to communicate. But I know that I think it would benefit us and the public if we have a roadmap where they can know exactly what the plan is.
I totally
would not
agree.
disagree necessarily. However, I would suggest right now our inability to get people in to testify is going to make it difficult to set a specific date for public testimony.
Why?
Because if we can't get the people in and we want to get let's say we can't get row officials in, or we can't get chief deputies in. Do we want to just say, okay, well, they didn't come in, so it's their tough luck, we're not going to bother with them?
No, but
Or are we going to bring them back? And if we have to bring in one at a time, we may not be able to set a specific date for public testimony.
I think
I-
it's
Can we work
important.
around it?
I think we're running a danger here
Right.
of not being candid about when they're gonna be able to speak. We should be smart enough to figure out a date in August or September that we could say general comments. We're not gonna have any discussion, it's just general comments. I think we could figure out a date to do that. And because if we don't, we're just gonna continue to build frustration from the public as well as from some of us.
Yeah,
That we're not
agree.
doing it.
I don't think it matters that we haven't interviewed everyone before we hear comments from the public, because we can hear comments from the public and continue with their
Yeah.
interviews. But if we don't get the public engaged in some fashion, we're going to have problems.
And the benefit of hearing from the public is it gives us an understanding of what information we may be able to provide that would be helpful. And there are questions that we've heard through the emails that come to us that we could produce a question and answer and hand it out that night that says, no, we're not deciding. They're going to ultimately decide whatever. If we recommend change, we'll either recommend change or not recommend change. If we don't recommend any changes, then it's over. If we recommend some change, then they'll vote on it. But I think having a document that they can go and everybody around this table can go and say, here are the answers that everybody's hearing, and then we could hear about it. So I think we could figure it out, Dave. I really do. I think it's beneficial to do that.
Let's look at the list of people that we were talking about, what you got right here in front of you. Let's set up a schedule. If we can't get people in on that schedule, then we will simply have to bypass them so that we can get to the public comment on schedule. Is that reasonable?
Well, I wouldn't look at it that way.
No.
No.
Then what do we do when somebody says, I can't come in on this date, but I can come in on that? Do we push the public comment?
I think we go and just plan what we can. Nancy's touched base with a lot of people.
We have a lot of
And
choices.
a
I
lot
think
of
we can
and-
fill in a
and
slot, no
We're
problem.
not required to get this done by August or September to get the interviews done. But
Correct.
I think we can go and say, pick a date that, whatever it would be, I don't know what it's gonna be, but we just go out there and say, that day is gonna be public testimony.
But we could also do those public comments, we could hear from 2 people that night, and then we could have 15 minutes of public
Actually,
comments.
no.
Why?
When we open up for public comment, we are here until the people in the audience are done.
Well, that's true, they have to
If
sign
that
up for
means
that.
midnight,
I think we.
no, I've been told that we cannot pull a time on that. I've been told we cannot set a time limit on that.
I can clarify on that.
Yeah.
For your required public hearing, anytime you do a hearing, you have to hear all of it. If you hold a meeting with public comment, you can set limits. Typically, the board does 2 or 3 minutes for whatever period of time. And you may want to plan a little later that night.
Yeah. But it's perfectly acceptable. We do
Right.
that on
We do
on
that
the
all the
planning
time with our
commission. We just
boards.
go and say, okay,
Yeah.
please limit your comments to 3 minutes. And we even say, we're going to handle comments from this period, for 2 hours or whatever it would be.
This time to
And-
this time.
Yeah, and basically, then we also remind people how to communicate with us through email. And so I think we could do that.
And if they don't sign up for public comments at the meeting, they can't speak.
And somebody suggested.
And at what point do you cut those off?
When the
I
meeting
think
starts.
you go up front, again, it's transparency. We're gonna have a meeting starting at 5:30, we're gonna cut it off at, pick a time, 8 o'clock. And we're gonna have comment cards that if you don't wanna speak but wanna give us a comment, here's a comment card for you to fill out. We'll give them to Nancy or somebody to put them in there. I mean, this is not,
And we've got a stack of comment cards we haven't gotten to.
no, comment cards not to
You don't
speak.
respond to them.
No,
Yes,
that's what I'm
she's-
saying. You say we're gonna have comment cards, people come in, they fill out a comment card, they come up and speak. Okay, we've got a stack of comment cards, people wanted to speak, we haven't gotten to them and it's 8
No.
o'clock.
No, it's not the way it works.
I think you're not,
Yeah, so
I'm
they
not
come
clear
in the
about
door.
what it is, go ahead.
They come in the door, they sign up that they want to have a public, they want to say something.
Yes.
And there will also be people that come that don't want to speak, that would prefer to fill out a comment card.
Okay, you have people who have signed up to speak, you have exceeded the time limit.
We make it.
You then say, I'm sorry, those of you who still want to speak, you can't.
Well, I think, Dave, again, without knowing how many people show up and how long they do this, we've done this on the planning commission with a lot of items that have been ones where people had opinions on. And I think most times we're able to accommodate most of the people.
Yeah.
There will be a time, if we're up front again, saying, look, we're going to ask you to limit it for 3 minutes for the respect of your colleagues and other members of the public. Please restrict your comments to 3 minutes, and we're only going to be doing this for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, whatever else. And then there will be other opportunities too. I mean, this is
Yes.
not
Right.
going to be
You
just one time.
facilitate.
Right.
But
Yeah.
what I'm more interested in is getting the word out of when
Yeah.
and how often, and so people are not frustrated.
Yeah, and if it goes too long and we have to cut some people off, they'll have an opportunity at a later date.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And the big thing too is there's no back and
Yeah.
forth. You don't engage them or respond to anything, you just sit and listen.
The big thing is trying to keep it to 3 minutes.
Right.
A lot of people do a pretty good job, though. They
Yeah.
say if they have the little red stop light there that you red, yellow, green, they're,
Good
they're
point.
pretty, but there
Yeah.
probably will be an
Yeah.
occasion for some people to go a little bit long, but for the most part, the ones that I've gone to or even spoken at, people, they do it, what, they're respectful, and they come in and they do it, and they follow their time. The other thing, though, I think is important on those comment cards is that sometimes there are two people. Or they both want to speak, but one decides not to, and so they allow the other person, like a spouse, to speak.
Yeah.
They do give them that second time period, so making sure that we do make that allowable, and then that we are aware that that person is not going to be limited to 3 minutes, they will have, or 2 minutes, it'll be 4 or 6, you double that time. So it's one person, they're speaking for two.
So, and we don't even have to do the comment cards. We could just simply do, you sign up, you want to speak, that's fine.
I think
No
the comment cards are a good idea, and I think that came through on one of the other emails, having a comment card for the people even sitting, and tonight, leaving it for the public record might be a good way to help with the public information, them
But you
feeling they have a
could,
voice.
I agree, but you could do the comment card at every meeting because you're not engaging.
Yes,
That's
I
a
think
good
it should
That's
be
a
at
good
all of our
point.
meetings
That's a good
and the public.
Right.
It should just be
So
part of
they
our
could do
thing.
that at any meeting
Yeah.
if we have
I
them.
was just trying to get it on the agenda.
I agree.
agree.
I think we should,
It
I
does
think we
need to
should
be on the
put it as an
I'm
action
not asking
item.
for a decision, but by
No.
next week, Nancy will have more information about some of the schedules of people. We could have it on the agenda and have a more robust discussion.
Or just take
I
a
like
vote.
your idea about having the comment cards for all the meetings and be clear again what's not. So if we can just put it on the agenda, I think I'm hearing that
Yes.
to be.
I would agree.
So we'll talk about that next week then, when we're also talking
Talking
about.
about the schedule.
And I guess one suggestion I have, if we do the public comment, I do not think we should mix it with interviews.
Well, that would be
No.
better.
I think we need, especially if you're talking, it needs to be 2.5 hours. I think we need to
Yes.
just
Exactly.
have a meeting, a session where people can come in and give their comment, and we all need to be here, and we need to be receptive, and we're not going to try to do any other business.
And when we announce.
What is the difference between what you're proposing and a public hearing?
I don't know what a public, I mean, I
Well, a
don't know
public
what the.
hearing-
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what the
Public comments we can cut
distinctions
off.
are, Dave.
Public
I'm
hearings-
just saying, all I'm saying, I'm not saying that I necessarily agree that now is the time to be thinking about it. I'm just saying if we do it, my hand is up for, let's make sure it's a discrete event that doesn't have anything to do with the business meeting and with our interviews of other people, that's all.
So as an example, with the advisory board meetings, we have public comment at every single meeting at the end.
But what I'm saying is, we're saying we're going to have a meeting that is exclusively public comment.
Yes.
Not we're
Yeah.
going to have public comment at the end of the meeting, but it's exclusive to public comment.
Well, wouldn't
If
they,
a meeting is exclusively public comment, what is the difference between that and a public hearing?
Yeah, but Nancy, don't we have to have a meeting call to order and some business and then the public comments?
You can do it whichever way, I mean, you set the agenda. The difference between the two is how long the meeting runs. With a meeting designed to take in public comment, you can set, we're going to close at 8:30, 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9 o'clock, whatever that is. With a public hearing, we're here until everyone who shows up is given their 3 minutes to comment.
Which I think if we do a public comment before the hearing, we're gonna, I mean, the more we incorporate public comment, I think the less option or the opportunity is to be here 7, 8, 10 hours. I mean, if that's what it's gonna be, we just need to have them more. They want to speak, and we're supposed to be serving them. So if we get there, and plus, honestly, I don't wanna be here for a year and come up with some recommendation and they, say no. Let's incorporate them now, because that's what we're supposed to be incorporating into public policy. They have the final vote. So hearing them sooner rather than later can also then mitigate length of meetings, because we're trying to get them in. The same people aren't gonna come, maybe some, but that's gonna be a small few. But then when we come to the public hearing, we might not have to be here I've been at those meetings, and you have Zoom. You have to, look at the people who are online, and are there anybody left there, and then everybody left here. So the more we do it, the sooner we do it, I think actually the better for all of us. And they will feel like their voices are being heard, and then we don't have to be here forever. They don't want to be here forever either. They
Okay.
just want to be heard.
We're going to set the schedule next week. Let's have this discussion over public comment next week, and we will actually vote on
Yes,
what we're going to do.
an action item. Perfect.
So what I'm hearing is if Dr. Keene is available, let's schedule the two of them. If not, we will have Evan Koch in with discussion about communication and public.
I think what I'm hearing tonight is the discussion of communication will fill more than the void for a second person.
I agree.
Yeah.
Cool.
I make a motion that we end.
This is the longest meeting we've had.
Well, I'm not sure we're ready for a motion yet, are we?
I can't even go.
So we have the
Okay,
following
we have
meeting.
meetings the 28th, 3rd, 11th, and 18th. We're going to be setting up schedules for those. Next week, we will also be setting up schedules for people on the list that was being distributed tonight, along with public comment / public hearings. We'll have to discuss that. And all that will be on next week's agenda. Okay?
Yes.
Now I think we're ready for that motion of yours.
Kristen made a motion to adjourn.
I second
Carol
it.
seconded.
Excuse me, but you said earlier that you wanted people to save their public comments to the end? That's what you told the audience?
No, we're not taking public comment at this time.
That's what you said, you yourself, sir, said to the audience when some people got unruly, that you said, hold your questions or your comments until the end.
No, ma'am, I did not, because we weren't anticipating it. Do you have something that you need to add to this discussion?
I would love to. Sorry.
Do we want to take public comment tonight, ladies and gentlemen? No. I'm sorry.
No.
We will give you a chance to make public comment at a future meeting. Yes, ma'am.
What is the email address specifically so that when we want to email you comments, that we can get that to each of you?
Nancy, can you handle that one?
You can send those either, if you want them to also go to the Board of County Commissioners, you can send them to kcbocc@kcgov.us. We are also setting up a new email address that will go just more for topics. You can send those to comments@kcgov.us. And then we'll know that, whatever, like for in this example, I have comments on the study commission, those will go to the study commissioners.
Okay, so if I wanted my comments to go to each person on the study commission, kcbocc@kc.
That would go to these commissioners and board commissioners. The second one, the comments one, would go to this group because the comments are not.
So comments@kcgov.us would go specifically just to the people in this room. But the other one would go to the people in this room and the other?
And to the Board of County Commissioners.
And to the Board of County Commissioners.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Call for adjournment. Vote in favor.
Aye.
Dave, you're abstaining or you're objecting?
No, I'm voting, yes.
The meeting is adjourned.